Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 2022-2023 promotion primer. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Benoit Molson, and I'm the Labatt Family Chair of the Department of Psychiatry. And I'm going to lead the first presentation, followed by Carol Pickersgill, who is the Administrative Coordinator of Academic Appointment. And we'll talk about junior promotion, and Rachel Delaney, who is our administrative coordinator for the department promotion committee, and we'll talk about senior promotion. So, so I'm going to cover why getting promoted, discuss a little bit the difference between junior and senior promotion, discuss the various platforms for promotion, have a slide for you to self-reflect on whether you're ready. And then, as I mentioned, Carol and Rachel will then discuss the timeline and the process that they curate, and then there should be hopefully time for some questions. So the question is, why should people want to be promoted, since it's not going to change your pay or your income, and most of the things that a lecturer can do, an assistant professor can do, not all, but most a lecturer can do, and most of the things that a professor or an associate professor can do, also an assistant professor can do. So the university give you in its policy and procedure manual governing promotion an answer where they declare that it's self-evident. Like, it's self-evident that all humans are born equal. In the US Constitution, well, it's self-evident for University of Toronto that the awarding by the university of a given rank confers status which is acknowledged and respected both inside and outside the academic community, that this status is important to academic community is evident. And they also mention the other side of the coin, that as a result, there is a need to protect the qualification for the rank in order that the status not be regarded as empty once attained. So that's a reminder that promotion at U of T is not based on seniority, and it's not an automatic advancement. As we discussed, as mentioned briefly, there are two separate processes, one for junior promotion from lecturer to assistant professor, which is organized and adjudicated by the department and is a simpler and easier process. And once you're an assistant professor, you're eligible for promotion to associate. And when you're an associate, you're eligible for promotion to professor. And going from assistant to associate or associate to professor is called senior promotion. And we organize the process, but it's not adjudicated by the department. It's adjudicated by the dean upon the recommendation of what's called the decanal promotion committee. And we're going to discuss some of those steps further when we do the timeline. So people are promoted on what are called platforms, and the platform really should correspond to your professional identity. So everybody is expected to be involved in teaching. You cannot be promoted to at the University of Toronto if you are not involved in teaching. But you also need, and teaching is enough, by the way, to be promoted for the junior promotion. And it can be enough for senior promotion, but most senior promotion require additional scholarly activities with excellence in either education or research or creative professional activities or CPA. And as I mentioned, for senior promotion, you need both competence in teaching and excellence in one of the three activities needed. There is a path for excellence in teaching solely, and it's possible, but then you need to have sustained excellence as a teacher. And the manuals say at least 10 years, and 15 to 20 years would be typical. So it's a slower path for becoming an associate or full professor. And I have to say, it's very rare to become a full professor in our department solely on the basis of excellence in teaching. It's possible on paper, but in practice, everybody of human memory who over the past 2 decades could have gone on solely on excellence in teaching, had been involved in education scholarship and CPA in education. And so they are from, I've been in Toronto only for 17 years. I can tell you it has not happened for 17 years. And we have tried to inquire who was the last person promoted solely on excellence in teaching to full professor. We have about 1% every year who get promoted to associate professor on the basis of excellence in teaching. But for professor, nobody can remember anybody in our department. It's possible, bigger department like family medicine and internal medicine typically will promote one person to professor based on excellence in teaching. So the university allow it, I will mention it. So now the question, are you ready? And you need to think of your productivity and reputation. So before we go to this slide, let's talk about junior promotion. Junior promotion, unless you obtain an advanced degree, a master or a PhD, which is can be a platform for promotion from lecturer to assistant professor, and then you don't have to wait. When you get your degree, you can immediately apply for promotion to assistant professor. And it's a fairly simple process because if you have got an advanced degree, that's one criteria for promotion. If you didn't get an advanced degree, the university, it was not always the case, but now the Temerity Faculty of Medicine, because there is a criteria of sustained involvement in academic activities, asks for a minimum of 3 years. So do not apply before 3 years because you will be turned down. At 3 years or more, you can apply. And remember that only what you did since your appointment. So what you did as a fellow or as a resident doesn't count. And similarly, once you become an assistant professor and you want to apply to be an associate professor, only what you did since your appointment or promotion as an assistant professor count. What you did before being appointed or promoted to assistant professor do not count. And similarly, when you're an associate professor who want to apply to become a full professor, only what you did since you became an associate professor count. The idea is you cannot be promoted twice on the same activities, and that's why it's the clock is reset at your appointment or at the time of promotion for the next step. So the criteria or the categories that lead to promotion is advancement and knowledge, and that's what technically people will talk about impact. Impact for research is actually very simple. It's based on publication and grant solely. And it's if you publish a paper in prestigious peer-reviewed journals, and if you get grant from a competitive grant, that's considered by itself a demonstration of your impact. As you will hear in a special presentation later, impact for creative professional activity is way more complex to measure and to assess and to document. So in that sense, it's in some sense a harder way to be promoted. And impact in education also has its own criteria. Then there is the idea of original nature. And if you want, you could use the word innovation for original nature. So you cannot be promoted solely for doing some administrative, very important tasks. For instance, being a vice dean or vice chair or director of a residency by itself will not lead to promotion. It needs to be your work, and there need to be some innovation. But if you create a new curriculum as a director of residency training, and that curriculum is adopted by other people, that would be considered a scholarly advancement of knowledge and practice, and it would be considered original. Then there is a criteria of extent of achievement, which translates in simpler volume and metrics. And again, people ask me, is there some defined volume and metrics? And I say no. However, if you look at the typical person, for instance, on the platform of research, if you want, the typical person would have, since they will become an assistant professor, about 20 or more publications. Half of them would be as first or senior author, half of them would be at co-author, plus a federal grant like CHR, NSERC, SHRC, Brain Canada would be in a typical. Now you say, well, I don't have a CHR grant, but I have 3 grants from a foundation, plus some AFP, plus this. And I say, yes, 3 small grants may be the equivalent of a big grant. The same way, if you say, I don't have 20 publications, but I've published a paper in Nature and in the New England and in JAMA and in Lancet, I say, fine, on those 5 papers, I'm ready to support your promotion. So when we give number and volume and metrics, it differs. And then for CPA and for education, I say it's more complicated. And you can have done 4 projects with a smaller impact or 1 big project with a lot of impact. It's not a computer scoring you. It's a decanal promotion committee looking at your whole dossier, who you are, and making a qualitative judgment. It's really a qualitative process, but if the quantitative metrics are clear, it's easier. If they are not clear, then it becomes a quantitative judgment. Then we have talked about sustain. So for junior promotion, sustain make 3 years. For senior promotion, on the basis solely of education, of teaching, no education scholarship, no CPA, no research, it will be 10 plus years. There, it's defined in the manual. And then there is the idea of a wide reputation, which translates for associate professor, a national reputation. So you need to be known in Canada. And then we can discuss during the question period, how do you demonstrate that you're known in Canada? And for an international reputation, it would be needed for professor. And if you apply solely on teaching, it's acknowledged that as a teacher, you're not going to be known outside of your university. So you apply for a waiver to the dean at the beginning of the process, and the dean will give you a waiver for an external referee letter, which means that you don't need to establish a national or an international reputation. And I'm trying to go. So in terms of scholarly product, okay, are you ready? So you can include a variety of work. I've mentioned publication in peer-reviewed journal and grants, which are needed for excellence in research, but are not needed for any other platform. So you could be promoted based on excellence in education or excellence in CPA without having ever published any paper and be on any grant. Usually people who have been doing education scholarship or CPA for, let's say, 10 years, 8 years, will have some publication. But I've seen people promoted to associate professor with 2 or 3 publications of which they were co-author. So you don't need publication and grants for education excellence or for CPA excellence. But if you have them, it's great, and it makes your case way easier. So you may not have the 20 publication and the PI of a federal grant needed to go on excellence in research, but if you have 5 or 6 publication, you're a co-author on 3, you are a first author on 3, and you are a co-I on some grant linked to your CPA or your education scholarship, it makes things easier. In addition, for those other for all the platform, but that's going to play more role for CPA and education, books, book chapter, being author of a report, a government report or a panel expert, an expert panel report. I mentioned people who have designed a curriculum, and then they have curriculum document to document that. What is called in the manual learning object, for instance, a teaching video, a website with active URL and a lot of hit, and other national or international work, for instance, having co-author guideline, being part of a subcommittee for the DSM. Those are the kind of scholarly products that are tangible, documentable, and that will play a role in your promotion. So I'm going to stop there and pass the virtual mic to Carol, and then Carol will pass it to Rachel. And Carol, you may want to adjust your camera because we see half of your face.
Oh.
Okay, by moving the... Okay, so Carol, Carol is going to cover the timeline for junior promotion.
Thank you, Benoit. Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Pickers-Gill. I'm the Administrative Coordinator for Appointments and HRIS with responsibility for the junior promotion application process. The timeline for junior promotions is about 6 months from start to finish. For anyone preparing to apply in the next cycle, please consider the following dates. So as you see here, all faculty members intending to apply for promotion in 2023 are required to declare their intent to apply online by December 20th of this year, 2022. And the submission deadline for completing all of the application packages is January 31st, 2023. The online declaration of intent will be found on our website, and I will throw that web link as well as the FAQ manual, which will give guidance to how to prepare the teaching dossiers in the chat after. Prior to initiating your request for promotion to the rank of assistant professor from lecturer, you should meet with your psychiatrist in chief or head at psychiatry at your hospital, as well as your university division director to discuss your eligibility for promotion. For junior promotions, all promotions are effective July 1st, 2023. And as Benoit mentioned, there are 2 categories for promotion: advanced degree, as well as sustained commitment to the academic mission. The details about these are on our website as well, which I will share in the chat. As far as tips go, my recommendation would be to discuss, again, your eligibility with your PIC and your division director, your U of T division director, just to make sure that you're eligible, and to check the list of required documents on our site, the Faculty Promotions webpage, which will list all of the items you will need for promotion, and also to check the details about the teaching dossier, which will be found in the FAQ manual that I will also send the link for in the chat. So if you have any questions after the primer, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I will pass the virtual mic back to Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Hello, everyone. I am Rachel Delaney. I am the Executive Assistant to the Chair. Oh, Benoit, could you put the slide forward for me, please? Thank you. I am the Executive Assistant to the Chair and the Administrative Coordinator for the Senior Promotion Application process. As you can see, the timeline for senior promotion is a bit longer than the junior promotion cycle. It's 18 months from start to finish. It begins in January, the cycle, and ends with promotion July 1 the following year. So I will just briefly go over some of these bullets. So once you've decided to apply for promotion, if you haven't already, the first thing that any candidate should do is begin the process of setting up meetings with your hospital chief or head. as well as your division director. And then lastly, the chair of the department. These meetings are important as it is an opportunity to review the basis of your application and to confirm your readiness to apply. Of note, we do in the chair's office strongly prefer that you have your meetings with your hospital chief or head and division director before meeting with the chair. And ideally, we would prefer that these meetings all take place before the end of March. It's not an issue if they spill out into April a little bit, but as quickly as you can get them done, the better. The next item to look out for is the announcement that will be shared in Psych News. It will come both as an element of Psych News and as a standalone announcement. You can expect to see this announcement in early January, inviting faculty members to declare their interest to apply for promotion to associate professor or professor. We ask you to complete a very brief survey that includes your name, whether you are an MD or status-only faculty member, what rank you are applying for, your hospital site and division. So it's very quick. Once you've completed the survey, the next deadline to be aware of is the preliminary submission of April 30th. Of particular note, at this stage of the process, we do require a complete application from every candidate. Once upon a time, we only asked for a cover letter and CV, but now we do require that we have a full application. A full application includes your cover letter, your CV, the data summary tables, and as applicable, either a research dossier or a CPA dossier, depending on the platform that you are applying on, and a teaching and education dossier. After the April deadline, the Department Promotion Committee, or DPC, will meet at the end of May in any given cycle to review all of the applications. After the DPC's review, each candidate will be provided with feedback on their application with suggestions on how to improve it if applicable. Candidates will then have until July 31st, so about a month and a half to 2 months, to make any further edits or changes to their application. After the July 31st deadline, which is the final deadline, the chair's office takes over and we begin the process of soliciting the other required elements of your application, such as student letters and external or internal referee letters. I do wish to point out that after the July 31st deadline, that is the last time that you won't be able to make any further changes or to your application. The reason being, just to keep in the back of your mind, we have to keep the application the same for the referees as what we submit to the decanal. Once we've received the letters, the DPC will meet one last time in November of any given cycle to review the complete applications. And afterwards, one more time, candidates will be notified to confirm that they have the support of the DPC or if there might be a reason to consider deferring their application. Following the November review, the chair's office will then prepare to submit all of the applications to the Decanal Promotion Committee by their January deadline, which is typically the second Monday in January. The Decanal Promotion Committee will then conduct their review over January, February, and will notify the department chair of their recommendation by mid-February. And all successful promotions are then effective July 1st of that year. Now, before I hand things back to Benoit, I would like to emphasize that from my perspective, there's a couple of things that candidates can do aside from attending the primer. The first is to read the promotion manual. Everything that a candidate needs to know about the process and specific elements required in the dossiers are all carefully laid out in the manual. The second thing I would suggest is to ensure that you give yourself plenty of time to meet with the people that you need to meet with and to prepare your application for the preliminary deadline. I think sometimes candidates don't realize the amount of work that needs to go into some of the elements that are required and find that they run out of time. So I would wholly recommend that if you haven't started, you probably should. Now, I too will add the link to the Senior Promotion Manual in the chat if it hasn't already been done. I will also add the links to the department promotion web pages, the senior promotion web pages, and the Temperley Faculty of Medicine's web pages. And as Karel mentioned too, similar with me, if you have any questions related to senior promotion, I can be reached by email. And I'm happy to answer, even if you're not applying this year, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. So I will now hand things back to Benoit.
So there was a question in the chat about the deadline for junior promotion. So I'm going to bring back the previous slide and saying the website has not yet been updated and it's a 2021 deadline. Take a screenshot here and you have the deadline for the junior promotion. And for those of you who want the senior promotion, and Carol, you can probably cut and paste it in the chat. And then for those of you who want the senior promotion is the deadline. I want to make a few comments on what you heard. You heard that it was required that you meet with your chief and your division director, and for senior promotion to me. To be fully transparent, it's not required. It's strongly recommended. You have the right to go for promotion without our support and against our advice. So anybody in the department can say, I'm being oppressed at my site or by the chair of the department. They don't appreciate me enough, and I want to go for promotion despite their advice or their support. That's your right as a faculty member, and you will be then adjudicated by, if you want to senior promotion, it's going to be what's called the FAC and the dean. If you want for senior promotion, it will be the decanal promotion committee and the dean. And it is possible to imagine that a department mistreat all their faculty and that don't want to promote them, even though they deserve to be promoted. I want to tell you, it's really our advantage to promote people. The more people we promote, the better I look. If I can say, look, this year we're promoted 20 people, 8 of them were women, 6 of them were underrepresented group, it makes me look good. When I meet with the dean, that's part of my job, is to support faculty member and help them to promotion. For promotion, same thing. So typically in a typical year, we promote 20 to 30 junior faculty going from lecturer to assistant, and we promote 15 to 20 going from associate to full or full to associate. This year it was 10 people promoted to associate, 10 to full. So we promote a lot of people in our department and we like it, and we are trying to be as supportive as possible. So if you hear from your chief and your division director, and for me, if you want to go for senior promotion, that you should wait, you have the right to say, I disagree with you. But my experience is people who do not get the support from the department tend not to be promoted. So, and when we advise you, we say, you're on a good trajectory, but you still need X, Y, Z, wait a couple of years, you will have a better experience. So my advice, and that's come from the dean to me, to you, is there is no, your career, your academic career is a marathon. Okay? If you finish your residency at 31 and you're going to work for 30 years, there is no problem spending 5 years an assistant as a lecturer, and then 10 years as an assistant professor, and then 5-6 years and an associate, and then you will still have the rest of your life to be a professor, and you can become an emeritus. So if you get promoted to professor at 55, you may have still 30 plus years being a professor. So those people who want, after 3 years, they say, I'm ready, they may or they may not be, those early promotion tend to be scrutinized. My advice is, unless you can make a very clear cut case, give yourself time, do it well. You heard from, and I know it sounds obscure, all those steps outlined by Carol. It's simpler for junior promotion, 6 months, but 18-month process for becoming an associate or full professor. But still, it's not difficult. It's tedious. It's like filing your taxes. It's not difficult. It's very tedious. Another analogy for those of you who are physicians is, imagine having to dictate 40 discharge summary. It's very doable, but it's tedious. So give yourself time. Don't try to apply too early. On the other hand, don't wait forever. Remember, if you are ready to become a professor, an associate professor after, let's say, 7, 8 years, and you decide to wait 12 years, everything you did for 4 years could have counted toward your promotion to professor. To me, the hardest step is to is to go from assistant to associate. If you go from assistant to associate and you continue to do the same thing for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you should end up a professor. As I said, an exception may be that track teaching only, because to become an associate professor on excellencies teaching, you need a lot of volume and excellent score. To do that to professor, you need something more in some sense. So at the end of the promotion, okay, you could say you're going to, I found that cartoon, congratulations on getting promoted to the job you're already doing. Remember, that's one reason that waiting a couple of years is okay for most of you. You do not need typically a rank. It doesn't have influence on your payment. If you are a researcher, want to apply for a Canada Research Share, then yes, you need to be an associate for tier 1 and a professor for tier 2. To be on the promotion committee in the department, to be some, a vice chair would typically have to be an associate professor. The typical head or psychiatrist in chief in a fully Tazen hospital would be an associate professor. The typical head or PIC in an affiliated site would have to be an assistant or an associate. So there are a few jobs for which having a promotion to get an endowed chair at the university, you will need to be an associate or full professor. To get a professorship, you will need to get to be an assistant or an associate. So there are a few jobs, but they are rare. They are very competitive, and unless you're on that track and you want one of those jobs, give yourself time, do it well. The process, I'm missing that slide where, well, no, so yes, sorry, it's in that slide. As I said, the process starts by initial reflection and self-assessment. And those of you who attended, who are the promotion primer 3 or 4 years ago and are coming back today because you want to apply this year, you're doing it right. My advice to people is attend the primer, start talking about it 2 to 3 years before you feel you're ready, because there's something you need to do that you cannot do the year you apply. And then attend again. And if you apply 2, 3 years before, if you attend the primer and you start thinking and looking at the manual 2, 3 years before going for promotion, you have an idea of where you're going. And one of my heroes, Yogi Berra, says, if you don't know where you're going, you won't end up there. So having a path in front of you will be easier. And then you attend again, or you watch the video, the year you're applying. And the year you're applying is to start to pay attention to the technicalities, like the various dossiers and when and what. 2, 3 years before is for things like national reputation, I mentioned, or international reputation. How do you establish one? Well, one day, for instance, one way to establish a national or international reputation is to be invited to give a grand round. So for national, it would be at McGill, UBC in Alberta. For an international, it would be in the US or in Europe or in Asia. So if you want to be invited for a grand round, you may have been in residency with a good friend who is now in Calgary, and they say, sure, we'd be delighted to invite you to give a grand round, but our schedule is full until next July. So that's something you say, well, then please invite me in 2024, 23, 24, and then you get on the grand round list for the fall of 2023. And then that will help you to do your promotion in 2025 or in 2026. So I'm giving you that as a concrete example of why it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And same thing, if you're going to do a good dossier, it may take you, it's like writing an excellent review. You may need to think about it for 6 months. don't start, when you see those deadlines, say, oh, we have people, they declare at the end of February, they are busy in March with spring break, and then in April, they spend 2 hours to send us an half-baked dossier as their preliminary submission. It doesn't work. It's better done by small bites. You remember again another famous quote, if I had had more time, I would have sent you a shorter letter, okay, that attributed to Mark Twain, even though people say he never said that. But I have said, if you have more time, you're going to have a shorter and way better promotion dossier. If you dump 60 pages or 100 pages of student testimony, various things, and pages without any synthesis, it's a bad dossier, and you may be promoted if you have done enough, but you're going to ask your reviewer to do a lot of work. If you spend your time, a couple of hours per weekend over 3-4 months, you can end up in April. If you start now, you've already started. And that's why sometimes people come to see me and I said, you're on an excellent trajectory, give yourself 1 year. And people sometimes do a preliminary submission, get some lukewarm feedback, they decide not to go that year, they work more on it, and the next year they sail through, which again, your goal and my goal and the goal of everybody in the department is to help you to have an easy promotion and to sail through. So I will stop now sharing slides. So there was that slide, and I will do the question. And I don't know if for those of you who were late, you saw the first slide. So for some promo people, it's on the right. They say it was tedious, it requires some work, but it was a glorious ascension to heaven. And for some people, it's the mine I bet that's a mine of in South, those illegal jewel mine in South America where people suffer and toil in the mud. So I hope that we are trying to facilitate it and make it more like to the right than the left. But it also depends a lot of what you do. To give you example, do not start with the anxiety of the blank page. We have people who have been promoted successfully and who we ask them the permission to share their dossier. So once you have decided who you are and what kind of promotion, if you say, okay, I want to go for associate on CPA with some education, not a lot of publication, you ask Rachel Delaney, my assistant, she introduced herself, coordinate the senior promotion, and she will send you a couple of examples of people who have been successful during the past 2 years. And if you say I'm a younger researcher, same thing, we have one for you. We have template. You can use those as template, and we on purpose do not select the boy genius, which I'm not. I went through the promotion, in like a honest journeyman. I didn't have a speedlight promotion in my own life. I was turned down once, I had to reapply, make my case. So, it didn't hurt my career, but I wish it would have been slightly more pleasant. So the point I'm making, the dossier we share is not the person who did a fellowship and traveled around the world and managed to do 60 paper over the 3 years an assistant professor with 3 HR grant. We don't give you those dossiers or the educator extraordinaire, which we have in the department. We are not going to give you Sanjeev Sokalingam or Brian Hodge dossier and you say, oh my God, or Melanie Barwick in CP, and you say, oh my God, I will never get promoted. We give you the promotion of an honest person who did the honest work at a normal speed and to inspire you and help you. And remember, if you like the structure, promotion dossiers are not published. There is no copyright. There is no copyright or plagiarism. You can, if you say, I love that table, I'm going to cut and paste the table and I'm going to use it in my dossier. Obviously, you keep the column and the title, you have to change the content. You cannot claim you have supervised the student of somebody else or the fellow of somebody else, but you are more than welcome to use the structure in those templates. When we give you those successful promotion dossier, people have themselves benefited from their colleague. So use there and be successful and ask for help. Rachel, me, you will hear from Mary Jane Esplen, your director, your hospital chief or head. You have a lot of people who are there to help you. It's a serious process, but it's, as I said, there is a tediousness factor, but it's very doable for most of you. So we have about 10 minutes for question. Maybe I'm going to go on the chat. So the chat, you have some link. I think I want to emphasize one thing that Rachel had said. Read. I meet with people and they ask me question. I say page 18, then I go online, I split, I share my screen. If we meet virtually, if we're in my office, I go on my screen. I bring the promotion manual, I open it and I say, let's look together. What are the criteria? And we find them page 18. And I say, here are the criteria. Some people then complained I treated them like a sixth grader. I don't. But if you ask me, you know, I'm not, again, I've not been promoted on the basis of excellence in teaching. I don't remember every criteria, but you have it in the manual. You have one page of the various things you can do on that plank or this plank. I know better. Was not promoted on the basis of CPO education, but I've been involved in quite a few. And then again, if you need an expert, if you say, here is my issue, we have a big department. We have promoted all kind of people with all kind of work, going from the traditional researcher or grant and paper to people who get promoted for having a blog or for having a website. So we can put you in, and usually people, you know, it's like paid forward who got promoted will meet with you for 1 hour and may ask, may help you if you need help on some specific technical, how do I explain how I did this or that? So I'm looking at the chat, senior promotion manual, the junior promotion.
Someone also has their hand raised, Benoit.
Okay, I'm looking. What is the criteria for waiver of external review? The waiver for external review is solely for people who are going to excellence in teaching. You cannot have a waiver of external review if you're going on research, CPO, education. So as I said, that's a narrower, longer path. If you say, I'm a master teacher, I have, you know, my teaching TES are 4.9. I've gotten those teaching award in my hospital, in the department, at the university. I want to be promoted solely for my teaching. You need volume and time and excellence. So you cannot be promoted on that track if you are an average normal teacher. That's part of your work. So as I said, you cannot be promoted based on lengths of service. So if you are truly a master teacher and you want to be promoted there, make your case, talk to me, and again, look at the manual and you can get an external waiver. That track doesn't get external review. You will be reviewed by people from U of T. So Dr. Snyderman, you have your hand raised.
Right, that's exactly the question, Benoit. How are you? That's exactly the question. I've been teaching for more than 2 decades all over. And obviously, I'm not a researcher, I'm a clinician teacher. And I wonder whether that would apply to me. I've taught everywhere in Canada and some other places. What is the process for me to apply for the waiver?
No, the waiver is, so you meet with your hospital chief like everybody else. They say, yes, we look at your CV, we look at who you are, we know you, and we are supporting you. You meet with your division director, both of them support you. Then if you are going to, would you go for associate professor? So then you would meet with me, I review everything, and I say, yes, I agree with you. You would meet the criteria for master teacher, and then Rachel will send a letter to the dean, and the dean, by the way, the dean will always give you a waiver. It's simply to document that you're going on that path and that you don't, you have to commit to a path or another. You cannot start to go for excellence in education and then after 3 months say, gee, I don't have enough education products, so I want to switch to teaching. But and remember, I don't know, I know you and I know you are, and I'm sure you have done a lot of teaching. The question then is not just quantity. You cannot be just promoted on that basis of volume and duration. You need volume, you need duration, and you need excellence. And excellence, sustained excellence in teaching. So the 10 plus year, you meet the sustain. You tell me you have a lot of volume, which you need. You tell me you have a long duration, which you need. The question that the decanal committee, remember, it's not us, will face is, do you meet the criteria of excellence? And I gave the example of grant. You can have one big grant from CHR, 3 small grants from foundation. So you don't need to be excellent in everything. If, for instance, the medical student love what you do and you get very good, but the resident find you are too harsh. So if you cannot have terrible score from the resident and have had remediation from the resident. But let's say you have great score for the medical student, and that was your specialty. You would do your promotion on the basis of being a master teacher for medical student and an OK teacher for resident. Somebody could do it fellow or grad student. So you understand, you don't need to have, you could be promoted based on CPPD. Somebody who has done a great program of education that is very highly reviewed, won prize for continuous professional development. John Teshima said in the chat that he will give a workshop, he will cover the sustained excellence in teaching pathway later, okay? So, and then there is another, yes, so I don't know, responded, but does that address your question?
Yes, it does, Benoit, thank you.
Okay. Then we have a question from Suze. Hi, Suze.
Hi, thanks.
Welcome
Thanks very much
back.
for this. Thank you. I had a quick, I hope it's a relatively quick question, but it's about the research pathway and with respect to the timing of things and the publications. So the first question was about the publications, and in the manual for academic promotion under publications and the research pathway, it does include book chapters that are published by academic presses as counted. And certainly, like in the field that I'm in, it's more common in science and philosophy that people would publish in book chapters, but I had always assumed that those weren't counted. So I just wanted to clarify if those do get counted.
Everything, by the way, you said which the response will be fast. With me, nothing is fast. Okay, it's always laborious and too many detail, too EMI, but everything counts. So yes, and then again, as I said, I gave you the typical person, the prototypical person who actually doesn't exist, because nobody is that prototypical person. But the prototypical person would have 20 peer-reviewed publications, half of them as first or senior, 1 federal grant, and they would have been an assistant professor for, let's say, 5 or 6 years. They have done some teaching in some area, could be graduate student, could be resident, could be, you don't need to do teaching in everything. You need some teaching at U of T, by the way. If all the teaching is outside of U of T, people are going to scrutinize you and you may get in trouble. So this being said, there is, as I say, a qualitative process. If you don't feel that mold, which many people don't, then you have smart people on the departmental promotion committee, who then make a recommendation to the decanal committee, and then on the decanal committee who adjudicate. And if you were yes, we have people in the department who have PhD in history or in something. And if they have written the textbook in history of psychiatry, that could be, and it was done in a scholarly way, that could be substituted for 5, 6, 7 paper. You could make the argument that if, let's say, if somebody is in the business of writing books, and then they may be better to applying as CPA. And I want to use that as an example. And I'm not prejudging of where you should apply and so on, but we have quite a few people who straddle the research and the CPA. And my advice, if you clearly meet the fairly clear-cut criteria for research, it's a higher promotion dossier. So I advise people to apply as researcher. However, there is a group of people in our department who internalize their perception as researcher. But when I look at their CV, I say, given your CV and given who you are, you will have a way easier way to go for CPA. And they don't like it. They say, but I'm not somebody who does CPA, I does research. I say, I understand you view yourself as a researcher, but actually I'm telling you, your dossier will be easier on CPA. And then we have that argument. And at the end, as I said, it's everybody's choice. An example, which I know is not your case, Sue, that's why I think in your case, I think if you want to make the case for research, those people who have done a lot of paper, may have done book chapter, are influential, they are clearly impactful, but they don't get grant. Okay? That would be an example of somebody, if you don't have grant funding, it's going to be easier to go on the CPA pathway than on the research, even if you consider yourself as, you know, there are some fields like forensic, gender identity, where people tend to do research. It's more ethnographic, it's more qualitative, they don't get grant. But they have a lot of publication, they have, as you say, book chapter, they have been part of a national guideline. And I said, you will have an easier time telling your story as a CPA story. And I have to say that that's the biggest group in our department. The number one in volume, the biggest path in our department for associate or full professor are on CPA, including some people that all of you think as researcher who get promoted on CPA. When you get promoted, you remember your promotion dossier is private. It's not a public document unless you're willing to share it. It's going to be seen by the departmental promotion committee, and the reality, the 2 reviewers in the department promotion committee will read it. It's like a grant review and present it to their colleague. And unless there is some debate, most people will not, the other member won't have the time to open the promotion committee of the 18 or 16 other people who have not been given to them. And then it goes to decanal where the same thing happened. I don't, unless again, there is a conflict or some dispute, I look at all the letters that are abstracting your dossier. I don't look at I don't have the time to do the work looking at the 20 dossier, each of them. So a dossier, a promotion dossier will be, a normal promotion dossier will be looked at by 4 people, 2 in our department, 2 on the decanal, and then you'll get promoted. And nobody say, I was promoted on CPA, or I was promoted on education, or I was promoted in teaching or research. People say, I was promoted to associate professor in 2024 or in 2025 or 6 or whatever. And I was promoted to professor in 2032, and you're a professor. So people should really pick the path that will help them to tell their story the best, not necessarily the, and you know, same thing, people who do CPA in education, we have quite a few. Should they go on education? Should they go on CPA? What is the easiest story to tell? Usually CPA in education will be easier unless you have very clear education product, like you created a curriculum. So those things are where I'm very willing to meet with people who go to senior promotion, and we discuss. And for some people, they are clearly in the gray area in between, and they can do whatever. And I've seen people who, for instance, they start on CPA. There is one person, they start on education. No, not education, sorry, research. They start on research, they go to the departmental committee in April, and they are told it would be better in CPA. Then they rewrite their dossier CPA for July. And then they get a lukewarm recommendation from the departmental committee. Then I review the recommendation. Then I dig in their dossier and I said, they were given the wrong advice. They should have stuck with research. And even though the dossier has now been done and cannot be changed, I write my letter of recommendation to the dean and the decanal saying that person submitted the dossier on CPA, but clearly they should be promoted on research, and here are the reasons why. And that person was promoted, they sailed through, no question asked. So remember, it's not life and death. It's not like deciding, oh, do I want to become a lawyer or a psychiatrist? Once you are one, it's very hard to, there are people who do that. For the promotion, those pathway talk, it's not a super rigid structure. Okay, I think it's 2:01. We'll have a last question, because in fairness for Sadia, and then we'll go to the next, and I will try to be brief.
Thank you so much. I mean, if you are feeling like you want to move on, I can maybe
ask your question. I think questions are more useful than the pontification and the slide, because they make it real.
Thank you so much. So I guess it is helpful to hear that even at the junior promotions level, it's worthwhile reaching out to your chief or division head. That's something I wasn't considering. So it would be helpful, especially because I didn't know that it would be recommended to wait at least 3 years applying from lecturer to assistant. If I wanted to get advice on whether it's worthwhile applying earlier, because that's something I'm considering.
You can't. That's not the rule. That's not the rule of the department. The temerity, we used to put people who were very productive after 1 year or 2. And a couple of years ago, the Faculty of Medicine sent us back 7 or 8 dossiers, say they are less than 3 years, we won't even consider them. So unless you get an advanced degree, the temerity Faculty of Medicine currently, they may change their rule in the future, will not, so my advice is don't waste your time, wait for your 36 months and apply. And it's not a recommendation. You don't need to talk to your chief and your division director. As I say, it's not obligatory, but we will request a letter from them. So that's why my advice to people is to talk to them and ask them, are you supportive of my promotion? And if they say, I'm not supportive, and they are going to write a negative letter, then you may want to, if there is a true issue, crisis or fight, people may want to come and talk to me or vice dean. But usually, I have to be honest, it's very, very, very rare. On occasion, and I will finish there are people who hear from their director, you should wait. There are people who hear from their division director, from their hospital chief or head, you should wait. Then they come to see me and I tell them, you should wait. And they tell us, you're all wrong. And then they apply. And then the departmental promotion committee say, you should wait. And they say, you're all wrong. And they go to decanal. And the decanal say, you should wait. And then they say, okay, it's a decision of the dean. And guess what? The dean say, well, all those 20 people who told you should wait were right, and you should wait. And people get very unhappy. So I finished there. The recommendation of Trevor, take your time. In the case of assistant to lecturer to assistant, the faculty say we won't consider it before 3 years.
Okay. May I ask, for those of us who've taken parental leave,
it's up to you. You may want to wait. So let's say you were away for 1 year. You may say, I am going to wait for 4 years. Or you may say, they won't. They will look 3 years for your appointment. So if you felt that during your parental leave, you continue to publish or write or do whatever you do, then they will look at 36 months from the day you were appointed as a lecturer. So if you don't want, the parental leave, by the way, it's true also for senior promotion. It's a choice. all of you, parental leave, leave for illness, take care of your grandmother, whatever. If you take a leave, it's your right to explain it in your dossier that you took a leave and therefore it slowed you down and therefore it may appear that you were less productive than you really are. Conversely, if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. So the making a paragraph about a leave is a personal choice. Some people want to talk about it to explain why they were slower than they feel they should have. Some people actually say, look, even though I know people who were promoted to associate after taking 3 years of leaves over their first 5 years, they didn't want to talk about it. They say, when I was on leave, I wrote, I was productive. It's irrelevant, I don't talk about it. So it's a personal choice. And again, you can ask advice and people will give you advice and then you decide what you want to do. So I'm going to stop here. Now we're 6 minutes late. Mary Jane is next. Thank you, Mary Jane. And remember, you can reach out by email, you can ask questions. There are a lot of people there to help you with a lot of those questions.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Benoit, you can hear me? Okay. Okay, thank you, Benoit. Thank you for coming. Benoit is right. At least, you know, the good thing is you're here today to hear. It sure helps a lot to know ahead of time and starting to collect information, letters, email invites, all kinds of things. You'll hear more from John too about that, how helpful that is in your dossier. So I've been asked to focus on research. I do chair the decanal promotion committee over at the Faculty of Medicine. So I do see the whole range of things coming through. I'm out of the room for psychiatry though. So what Benoit alluded to this or actually directly talked about identity. Who are you? It's really important to think about the platform, tell your story. And honestly, even in research, everybody's story is very unique. Yes, there are metrics, and we're even moving beyond just a narrow definition of metrics. But really, we want to hear who you are, and what you need to think about is showing the decanal and the Department of Psychiatry Promotion Committee areas of scholarship. What did you do? What did you lead? Where is the scholarship in what you're doing and everything you're doing? Everybody needs to do teaching, and that includes our PhDs. We call them status only because they have a status only appointment, but including the PhDs, but all teaching counts. So that could be, and you'll hear a lot from John, public education, graduate school education for the PhDs and researchers. It's often PhDs and masters and undergraduate thesis for research projects or research thesis. But all teaching counts, the clinical teaching, intern teaching for psychologists, all of it counts. So make sure that you're collecting evaluation information and scores or testimonials. You're going to need to show that you're at least competent in teaching, even as a researcher, or excellent in teaching. You have to show at least competence. Now, scholarly activities, as you heard, can be research, education, and teaching or creative professional activities. We're now going deeper into each of them. And you have to have excellence in at least one platform and competence in the other. And usually the other is teaching. And there is the sustained teaching excellence. You know, Benoit and I and the team think about this as the master teachers. These are individuals who do a huge amount of teaching over a long period of time and have demonstrated excellence in a sustained fashion. Now, this is a busy slide, but it is helpful. You know, it's something that I received from Avram Gottlieb, who used to chair the decanal, actually. But think about your plan, whether it's research, but also for CPA. You'll hear from Melanie Berwick, and also for education scholarship. Why are you doing it? So usually there's review of knowledge or a line of research or a theme around the research objectives and goals. So make sure in the story we understand that. We'll see it in the papers, but you'll have a research dossier, and we want to see evidence that it's been you know, disseminated, that there has been some component of evaluation and research analysis. So it's really about what is the scholarly activity in the initiative? What are the outcomes? Are you disseminating? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the associate and the full professor level. We want to understand the impact of your research, and the same for CPA of education, but also for research, and dissemination is important. Each dossier is different, as you've heard. In the research case, we need to hear about your research plan, your aims, your vision, prospectively, it's really important to collect everything. If you know that your research is having an impact outside of Toronto, outside of Ontario, usually we can see that by invited presentations or workshops. You're presenting at national or international conferences. You've been invited to come and mentor or do a workshop on a project. Your research is being replicated perhaps, or you've been asked to join other teams, or you're leading international and national teams. So again, letters can be helpful. We're going to ask for external letters looking at your dossier, which is very important in the weight as a source of objective data, because that's peer review. But also when you have invites, keep letters or emails or anything along that line. And please do look at the promotion dossier in the section that you'll be promoted on, and go through that manual and look at the charts in the appendix, as Rachel and Carell indicated. Keep your CV updated now and track your impacts. Easier to do prospectively, believe me. Now, we look at the whole variety of work. I heard the question about the book. That counts. Books count, actually. But for sure, for researchers, we're looking at those peer-reviewed journals. And there's a little bit of course, we love the New England Journal of Medicine and so forth, those high-impact journals. But we are very aware in the Decano Promotion and the Department of Psychiatry Promotion Committee that context is really important. In some journals, I can give the example of palliative care, that's psycho-oncology is where I've been doing research, but there are other areas where the impact factors may not be as high as New England Journal of Medicine or other specific psychiatry journals. They all count, but we do look at impact factors. It's not the only metric. So everything counts. Book chapters also count. Some of you will be doing work that is translated. Your research is translated, so you may be entering or getting into CPA because you've been involved in guidelines or ministry reports. They also count because that's showing impact from your research, or any teaching videos around research could also be helpful. And we want to look for associate and full professor, what is the national impact or reputation, or for full professor, the international level of work or reputation or impact. So scholarly areas of research, these are the metrics. We are looking for sustained sources of funding. It's not about the amount. We are looking at whether there's tri-council funding, but all funding counts. Some of you have more local grants or ministry grants or Health Canada types grants. They also count. We're looking at your status on the proposals, both co-PI, principal investigator, but also co-investigator. And for going for a research as your primary appointment, we're looking for authorship, first authorship, senior responsible authorships. In global research, I will want to make sure that you're aware. Often we're doing research internationally, and you may be, there used to be a term called, I think, parachuting in, coming in, doing research with other countries and putting yourselves first on the grants or the research projects or papers. But in fact, local academics or local clinicians are carrying out the work. And we are very open now to understanding your role if it is a work that's promoting global capacity building, training, research initiatives internationally, but you have purposely not been the first author or the leader on that team. Absolutely let us know. Document the purpose behind that you're building capacity, that you are honoring the in an equitable fashion, the leadership on those projects. That is absolutely possible to do. We just need to understand it when you enter your dossier. The H-index, individuals sometimes perceive that is the sole source or the major metric. It's not, it's no longer mandatory. We do look at it. We're aware of context of journals. We're aware that they vary. And we're also aware that there are challenges with H-index, but we do include it. And usually people do include it on their dossier or their CV. There are other types of metrics. I know that Melanie will go more in depth, all kinds of other ways of measuring. And I think there would be some changes in the next year or two, expanding the types of value propositions and impacts of research, and even understanding a little bit more why you're carrying out specific areas of research. So your own vision, your own role, your own rationale and identity piece and values around the work that you do. That's something that's, I think, going to be expanded in the manual. We're looking at national and international and the impacts of your work. I'm not going to spend time on the assistant professor level because Benoit did spend time, but these are areas where you're getting grant funding, you are publishing, your first or second author on grants, you're involved in teams. It's pretty straightforward. Benoit went through that, but let's look at the associate professor. So typically, individuals are typically at least 5 years or more since the last promotion. I think it's often around 5-6 years since assistant professor promotion. Make sure that your dossier is clearly organized and documented. And we're looking for evidence of independence. So just like in creative professional activity, there may be group activities, or in teaching even. In research, there can be group activity, but we want to understand your role. So let me give you another example. Sometimes we have individuals going for associate professor who are involved in statistical procedures of a grant. They may not be the principal investigator in all of the grants, but they're an important person on the team. Or in global research, you may not be the first author in a grant, but an important component of an intervention work of that team. It's okay to include group work. We just need to understand your role. And I've seen many people go through for associate and even full professor who are playing a lot of team roles, but they have demonstrated some independence, and they've demonstrated such a key role that the work itself would not have gone forward without that person's role on the team, if it is a kind of a group activity. National reputation is important, or national impact for your work. So make sure that you are disseminating, and that includes workshops or invited or peer-reviewed abstracts, presentations at national conferences. You should be also thinking about international. Sometimes people are doing a lot more international work than even national. That's fine. But we need evidence that you are known outside of the University of Toronto in terms of your scholarship and its impact. So save all that information and make sure it's on your CV. For full professor level, again, it's usually at least 5 years since the last promotion, 5, 6, 7 years or more. Scholarly outputs, now we're looking at the international level. So a guideline, by this point, you're probably talking 60, 70 publications, but again, it's not just about quantity. It can be less, it can be more. It's about being known outside of the University of Toronto and in the department. We're looking at the journals, we're looking at all the metrics, sustained funding over the period of your associate to full professor time. We again, as Benoit pointed out, we would be looking particularly carefully at the time since you were associate professor, so that period after. But we do look at the whole, by the way. I mean, that's part of the story. Invites to participate in national, but in particularly international meetings. This could be international panels. This could be parts, the Canadian on a set of international guidelines. Maybe you're asked to join a guideline development team, which is also reviewing research, looking at the empirical evidence that's going to result in those guidelines. So again, document everything, anything that you can do to show us that you have an international reputation or impact for your scholarly work. Service activities are also included and valued. So teaching, you must, as a researcher and scientist, demonstrate at least competence. And let me give you a clear example of what we mean by competence. So that may not mean that you have excellent scores the entire period. You may have some, and that's great. We hope you do, but you may not. I want to talk about professionalism. This is an area where it has cost researchers even a full professorship. If there are professionalism issues that have been reported in your teaching, or a series of negative reviews, doesn't mean forever you can't go forward, but we need to hear from both the chair and the candidate what has occurred as a result of any type reports or negative student testimonials or scores. What has the candidate done to improve their teaching or to address the issue? Because if there is a professionalism issue, either reported or just, and believe me, the reviewers can tell this, they can read between lines on all kinds of letters. If there's evidence of that, that does not meet the bar for competence, and it could cost a review. It could cost your promotion either associate or full professor. So if that occurs, make sure that you have a discussion with your chair and chief, and that you are looking at those scores, or making sure in your departments you're getting feedback on your teaching so that you can improve and address the issue. And I think you're going to see, I know the Department of Surgery is even looking at including a sign-off letter by a chair where this has not occurred, because it is a really important issue in our Faculty of Medicine. Mentorship counts. I think there have been questions in the past. Does all teaching counts? Yes, because for researchers, a lot of your teaching may be mentoring junior faculty. That counts. Make sure that you look at the mentorship tables at the back of the manual. You may be doing primarily postdoctorate teaching of the fellows. You may be doing clinical teaching. You may be doing a lot of PhDs and master's level thesis committees. And even if you're not the primary supervisor, of course, that also counts. We're looking at sustained record of service. We expect researchers to be involved to some extent, either at the hospital level or the university level. And everything counts, including if you're involved in government or ministry type work, other types of missions outside of the university, that where your scholarship is being used to inform some of the outcomes or the products. You may include CPA. Some researchers, and we want that because, you know, CPA partly came about because some research was ending up on the shelf. You know, research projects would be completed and principal investigators would basically go on to the next grant in research. And we really want to make sure that a lot of research outcomes, of course, get translated, or there are implementation science approaches, or something is happening so that those research outcomes get translated into clinical service or community agencies or wherever they need to be. So I do know that there are a number of scientists who transfer over in their research into the CPA area, and that is fine. But again, as Benoit said, he really recommends going on a primary platform of either research or CPA. So you are asked to put in a letter of intent, explaining your story, helping us understand your research area, your theme, and so forth. Look at the manual, what's required, making your case. And the chair's letter carries a lot of weight as well. Where is the research scholarship? Why should this candidate be promoted? What is the theme? What are the outcomes? And where is the scholarship? This is an example of a summary sheet. I think you're going to see some for education, but this is an example where you may have research awards. Keep tracking it. It's really a good idea to look at the manual earlier than later. And I would start creating some of these charts and maybe just fill them out every year, every 2 years. It makes it a lot easier, where you record things like awards or students that you're supervising, you know, mentorship tables. There are tables in the back of the manual. This table is, let me see, academic research supervision. Another example of a table shows you where you can record for thesis supervisor committee. It just really helps organizing your outputs and your involvement. Again, this is just another type of table showing your papers, and you'll be asked to organize it this way. One of the things, I'll spend a little bit of time on this, a few minutes, because this is not in the manual at this point, but I believe it will be in the manual by next summer. I am chairing a working group that is looking at EDIIA work and promotion across the board. And it will have implications for researchers as well, but we do absolutely value work in EDI. We want to make sure we understand the nature of it. We want to hear your story around that. And again, it can't just be good service. We'd like to see about the scholarship, the rationale behind it, what the work was, what you did, what your role was in the work. But for researchers, I have a working group looking at this. We're reviewing the literature and we're reviewing manuals, and we're looking at this area in terms of tenure and promotion. And a lot of you are being asked for this already. You may have to put in, you may be asked to put in an EDI statement around how you conduct research and how anything you're doing around your research teams and so forth. So just watch for that. And this will have also implications for CPA, education and other areas, and your teaching. Some of you are very ensconced in EDI, and that is your primary area of work. And again, we will have some guidelines. We will be reviewing that. We had 2 individuals go through this year in the CPA platform who were primarily ensconced in EDI work. One at the associate professor, one at the full professor level, both went through. So I want to make sure that you're aware that this will be counted and looked at, and this will be coming. And there's an excellent guideline for researchers. If you've never seen it, put out by the vice president's office and the research office at U of T. It's an excellent guideline for how to do statements, but also just building your research team related to EDI and the kind of research that you do. The review process, Benoit briefly went through this. At the decanal level, by the time they get over to the faculty of medicine level, your dossiers are in pretty good shape. You've had people look at it already. We have a similar process where there are 2 primary reviewers digging deep through your dossier, but we all basically look at it and we talk about it. All of the reviewers for psychiatry are outside of psychiatry, because those of us on decanal, and John Tashima is on the decanal committee, we leave the room for psychiatry. But you know, we look in depth, we are looking for the evidence of scholarship, we're looking at strengths. There is an option where if not everything is quite there, we have some questions, you will be deferred, and Benoit will be invited and the candidate to submit. You have about a month to submit more details. Benoit will come and champion and make a case for you to go forward. So there is that second step if you know you are deferred, because we vote and you're promoted, you're deferred, and we want to know what else is. We have some questions, or we felt that the external reviews, maybe the letters were a little bit weak. We need more information or clarification. Where do people run into some difficulties? So it's usually insufficient information or evidence of research scholarship and impact, that we just don't have enough to see the scholarly impact, or that there is a lack of clarity around the independence. For researchers, it's very important to be demonstrating independence in the scholarship. We may not be clear enough that there is a national, either reputation or impact, or an international level for full professorship. We have questions sometimes about the role, especially, and it's not uncommon these days, many of us work in large research teams or interdisciplinary teams. So we just need to know, what is the component you led? What is your role on that team? What did you do with the collaborations, and how did you contribute? Lack of continued and sustained funding can be an issue, and national funding. So it doesn't always come down to that, but if there are a lot of just small local grants, that can be challenging in terms of going through for promotion. So help us understand that. So I would really be advocating for you to be looking at getting national tri-council funding. But we know it's difficult. We know that there are other sources of funding. It all counts, not to discourage you too much. And as Benoit said, sometimes people just come a little too early, and we know they're stars, they're doing great. They're just not right there yet. And so if you haven't met the bar, it's better to wait. Benoit and the promotion committee in psychiatry will guide you on that. And then lack of evidence related to teaching scholarship. And that is really taken seriously, that you meet the bar, at least for competence. So those are my slides. I'm going to stop sharing. I know we have a break before Melanie, but we might have time for a couple of questions. I'll stop sharing and open it up for questions. I'm looking at the chat. Oh, Sadia, go ahead.
Just to clarify, I'm asking for the link for the EDIIA document. You had a link in your PowerPoint slides. I was wondering if it can be shared.
Yes, I didn't slide, but I will share it. It's yeah, I'll send. How do I best get that? I thought it was in my slide. You can open. I'll send it out. It's in. If you even Google EDI and research at the University of Toronto, I think it will come up. But I'll send it out. It's really important to look at, I think, because we are looking closely at that document, and I think there will be some changes coming that also will influence research. I'll get the link and add it to my slide, and you'll be getting the slides. Is there anything in the chat? I should just look and that. Oh, that was the question. Oh, Susie, if I have a number of papers in the pipeline under review. Yes, we look at papers that are accepted in press. You know, there have been cases in a deferral, not in psychiatry, but this could happen in psychiatry, of course, where individuals are just on the line. People are not quite sure to put them through or not. And we have in a deferral asked if a paper or a grant got funded or a paper got published. So you can put all your interest in and submitted and in, let me see, you can put all of that on your CV. And I would put everything, I would include everything once you, and we know that, same with grants, right? That you may have grants under review. And sometimes we come back and ask someone's.
वॉल्यूम बहुत ही है आपको सुनाई दे रहा है क्या बोल
I think that's it. I don't see any questions. I think we're going to take a 5-minute. I think Melanie might be here. I think to keep us on schedule, should we take a 5-minute break?
Sure, I'm ready to go whenever, Mary Jane.
How about we come back at 10:36?
Okay.
And then you're going to hear more about CPA. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if everybody's back. Melanie, do you want to wait a minute or two or just start?
Yeah, and I'm on a brand new computer, so I have to figure out how to share with
Okay.
Zoom.
Okay, well, wait, like it's 2:36. Wait a minute and see.
Okay, I think I figured it out.
I
I'm
think
gonna have to
people-
quit Zoom and come back in apparently to be able to share
Yeah.
my screen. Sorry.
It's okay. Ben,
Melanie, take your time, but when you're ready to start.
Okay, je reviens tout de suite.
Okay.
All right.
yeah, there's time.
Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully this works.
Smell it, did we lose Melanie? Oh, she's gonna, like, she had to sign off and come back. Okay. I'm just looking. Did somebody say there's a question? Chris, hold on. Evaluate teaching. You're going to hear a lot more from John about not a minimum number, but no, I wouldn't say there is a minimum number about teaching. When you're going for the sustained excellent plank, like the one with the waiver, your dossier is going to be a lot larger, and John will get into this, but again, I would say it depends on, yeah, John's written the context of teaching. What we're looking for is sustained excellence. So for research, I don't know if you're asking for researchers, no, it's not about volume. Sometimes in discussions, people wonder if researchers are doing enough teaching. So for those that are more junior, eventually think about getting a School of Graduate Studies appointment in either Institute of Medical Science or another department where you can be involved in some graduate thesis, because you're doing a lot of research and you may not be doing lectures or teaching clinically as much. It really depends, but we need evidence of scores. Oh, the other thing, well, I guess John will mention for the PhD too, because they're not in Power and Metis, like we need to have evaluations. So I wouldn't say it's about the volume though. That's not really the main point. Okay, I'll stop. So so we've got Melanie's slide. So Melanie is really an expert on creative professional activity, and she went on CPA for full promotion and for full professor, and you'll see that she knows a lot about CPA. So over to you, Melanie. Why don't you just start when you're ready?
Sure, thanks, Mary Jane. How much time do I have just so I can monitor myself? It's 2:40 now. We're going until.
I'm just looking at the schedule. It says we have a break at 3:20. So
Okay.
you've got all.
Oh, plenty of time. Okay. So I'm one of these people who is a full-time researcher, but went forward on CPA. So Benoit mentioned that when he was speaking earlier, and it happens, and it's not going to matter. You're just trying to present yourself in the strongest way possible. So I'll just add that. So I'm going to talk about your CPA dossier and try and highlight both a very practical approach to building that dossier and also some key main messages as you work through it. So I'm hoping that by the end of my presentation, you'll be able to outline how you're going to capture your impacts in CPA, and CPA is all about impact. And I'm going to give you a table, like a worksheet to enable you to do that. Okay. So first off, we know we have the 3 dossier opportunities alongside your academic service. So we've heard about research. John's going to talk in a moment after me about teaching. This is CPA. And CPA is really a way of recognizing the sorts of things that we do that lie primarily outside of the research bucket or the teaching bucket. There is an overlap between your professional development teaching. So that is to say, workshops or any kind of curricula that you've developed for professionals, people who are already practicing, not people who are in their formative education. And so there's a bit of an overlap there. And at the U of T, there are 3 broad categories of CPA, as you can see listed here: your professional innovation and creative excellence, contributions that you might make to the development of professional practices, and your own exemplary professional practice. So what you're really, sorry, trying to do in your CPA dossier is tell a story. So in order to do that, requires you to do 6 different things. Describe what you did in the CPA activity. Describe why you did it. This is your purpose. How you did it. This is your method. What you actually created or delivered, or what the output was. Then you need to, whoops, where'd that go? Describe something about how what you've done has been critically appraised by others. And I have to move this thing. And really importantly, evidence of how this mattered. So the so what piece and the so what for whom, and providing the detail of what those benefits were for the people you developed this for, this CPA activity. Most people are able to describe what they did. They're a little sketchy on why they did it, but that typically comes through in their philosophical, intro to the CPA dossier. They may talk about how they did it, and certainly catalog what the outputs were. But what people fail to do most of the time is describe the impact. I really love this quote by a friend of mine and colleague in the UK, who is the kind of director of research impact at the University of Lincoln. And she came and spoke to one of my course cohorts this past year. She said, there's a big difference between what is meaningful and what is countable. And I know that meaning is depending on, it's the eye of the beholder. But if what you're measuring as impact has to do with you, that's productivity, it's not impact. So when you're checking yourself and you're writing your dossier and you're saying, here's what I did, and here are my impact indicators, if those impact indicators are about you, that's not what we're waiting and looking for. What we're looking for is, what was the impact on the people you created this for or did this for? The recipients, not you, okay? So your research dossier will be where you talk about your productivity indicators. This is where you tell stories and you document how the things you have done have impacted other people. What were your intentions? How did you do it? And where did it land? So an outcome, an end result, probably, your product, your KT product, if you will, your CPA product, but impact is what effect that had. So typically it's a type of indicator. I'll show you a whole slew of indicators you can consider. It's a story. It's how can you demonstrate that people knew what to do with the knowledge you shared and that they benefited from it in some way. So what you have to document in your CPA dossier is scholarship. And as uncomfortable as it might be for some of you, scholarship or the CPA dossier requires some self-promotion. Not bragging, not something that is, not tasteful, but you really have to be able to give people access to your work. They should want to engage with it. They should understand it. They should benefit in some way. So that means self-promotion. You've got to get it out there. You have to talk about what you're doing. It's not about you. It's about the thing that you're doing, that is the CPA, its purpose, who it's for, and how it might be helpful, and how it resonates for people, and how it meets a need for them. So your CPA dossier is very much a narrative. So you may have different things that you are discussing in your CPA, depending on what kind of work you've done. But it has to describe what you've done and how it had an impact. So I know that's not comfortable for some people, and some people do it well and in a classy way, and others maybe not so much. But you have to, market yourself. You have to self-promote and give people opportunities to further amplify that self-promotion. It's part of dissemination. It's part of promotion, and it's part of engaging people with the products that you're building. So in order to do that well, you need to have clarity on what you're doing, why you're doing it. So that intention, explicit, structured approach, and how that's intended to benefit people. So you want both of these things.
Probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, but very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. By why, I mean, what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? And why should anyone care?
So it's something to think about. The purpose of CPA is to really bring academia and the things that we're doing at the University of Toronto in closer alignment with greater potential for impact for the concerns and the things that are important to people in the community who are not in academia. So it's about bringing those two linkages together. Traditionally, if we look and to this day in some other universities and their academic promotion criteria, those typically focus uniquely on teaching and research and do not include community engaged scholarship, knowledge translation activities and outputs, CPA. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that productivity is not important. I'm just saying that productivity in CPA dossiers has to also coincide with the purpose, the why, know your why, as Simon Sinek says, and also your method, your critical appraisal, and that so what piece. Just looking at the chat quickly to see if there was anything important for me. So CPA tries to revamp that terrain and create a greater balance with how we align, communicate, engage with various communities and settings. And so it's really that back and forth interaction and engagement so that, what we're doing in academia doesn't sit in the ivory tower, as we're used to saying, and actually resonates for people outside of academia and has potential for impact. I had mentioned at the start of my talk that there are 3 criteria for CPA at the University of Toronto and the Faculty of Medicine. The first is professional innovation and creative excellence. So that's anything you might invent, a patent, a license, a new technique or methodology, a conceptual innovation, an educational program outside of the university, so the professional development continuing ed piece, and could also include patient education. So remember, you are describing the what, the why, and the so what for each of these things as they fall in these different areas. The second criterion is contributions to the development of professional practices. So a new technique, a conceptual innovation, an educational program, it has to be illustrative to students and peers, recognized by peers and emulated by others, or have impacted practice in some way. And so it means that for everything that you develop and put out there that could be CPA, there's an evaluative component. And there's only an evaluative component if you're clear on why you're doing it. My intention in doing X is to change attitudes, impart knowledge, inform decision-making, address stigma in the community, whatever it may be, you need to then have an evaluative component that demonstrates that you in fact accomplished those intentions. So your work's not done with the creative piece of your CPA. And then there's the bucket for exemplary professional practice. So where you might have been involved in developing a guideline, or you've been at a policy table, developing consensus statements, setting standards, those sorts of things. Typically, you are doing these things with a group of people. And so it'll be important for you, as you describe this activity, to document, not just describe it, but also document what your role was in that group of people doing this work, and also what the impacts were. Where did it go? Did policy change? Did you develop a standard that's now available and being used in practice? How can you show that that's the case? So when we look at CPA dossiers, we are trying to understand the fulsomeness of someone's career pathway, and we've also looked at their research and their teaching dossier, and we're reviewing the CPA dossier and trying to make sense of how all these things fit together. And it's a different level of attention because we can't kind of just count things. We can't count number of papers or number of grants or invitations to international plenary opportunities, those kinds of things, the countables. What we're looking for here is a description of what you did, why it was important, how you did it, and what the outcome was and how that impacted things for someone outside of academia. It's usually linked to your research, it's related to your discipline. We need to see evidence of sustained and current activity. In other words, it's not a one-off. And it really is on the meaningfulness and the intention of what it is you're trying to do. It's not about quantity. And my example of that is Marie Curie, who, as you know, needs no introduction, but the point being that, you know, her innovations were two primary innovations. And, you know, she could have written 2 papers, but it had such a fundamental impact on science and health and well-being that was pretty phenomenal in and of itself. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality. What have you done? Why did you do it? Who is it for? And you know the rest. So that piece of benefited is really important. And it's going to require some thought and some planning out as you do everything that is considered community engaged scholarship or CPA, not just doing it in a rote fashion as a scholarly activity, but really thinking through your intention. And if you know that, then you can have a plan for what indicators of impact are you going to collect. How are you going to evaluate that you actually met your purpose? And I think any talk that you give, anything that you do that is not a paper or a grant should have an intention. Typically, even when you do a plenary, you have objectives for that talk. It should also have an evaluation attached to it. And if you don't evaluate it in the moment, whether it's, you know, using your smartphone and some kind of a quick 5-question survey on, there's a variety of different open source survey platforms you can use, capture something about whether your intention was met. Whether people are walking away with something at the end of your activity. Because if you don't capture it then, the moment is lost. You won't have indicators of impact at that moment for those kinds of things. So when we're looking at assessing CPA and we're reading your dossier, we're looking at not just what you did, but why did you do it? What's the purpose? And it's a specific purpose. I'm not talking about, you know, I have an interest in improving the mental health of the population. There's a specific purpose tied to a specific behavior or output or something that you did. How did you prepare? What methods? What did you do? And did you actually achieve that purpose? And reflecting back on what was gained, did you take advantage of every opportunity? What's next for amplifying the benefits or the impacts that you think you've already attained? And, you know, give people a clear picture of how this went outside of the university and academia. So several years ago, you know, because this is so tied to dissemination, I developed a planning template for dissemination for researchers, and I'll share it with you. It's available to use for free. And it allows people to plan for their intentions, for their knowledge translation dissemination activities. And this is just a sampling of what intentions might be. So generating awareness, sharing knowledge, informing research, which we do, and we talk about that in our research dossier, informing decision-making, and then being a first step to implementation planning, which is something else, but facilitating change, either in practice, in community settings, in policy, and so on. And so this just gives you an idea concretely of what I mean by a purpose or an intention. So documenting your CPA requires you to know your why, tell a story, connect the dots. Document over the course of your career and demonstrate benefits and impacts. One of the great pieces of advice that I received early on in my career from a colleague was to evaluate things, but also as they were happening, but also to keep an accolades file. Sometimes it's a paper file because you get some things still in paper, and sometimes it's an electronic file. So if I give a talk and I get an email back thanking me and hopefully saying one or two things about what impacted them from that presentation, I store that in a file. If it was something more substantial in terms of a body of work, I might chase down, you know, someone who invited me, or the audience, or the chair of a panel or a working group, and say, you know, I'm soliciting a few words from you about the work I've done on this group and the impact you think we've had as a group, because at that point it's a group activity. It's not your impact on the team unless there's something to say about that, and solicit that. That's a solicited letter, not an unsolicited letter that comes from the department. If you've worked for 10 years on a ministry contract to do a particular thing in the community as part of related to your academic work, presumably that's had some kind of an impact on the system. Who might be in a position to document that for you and talk about how that impacted the system? Store that letter. It doesn't, you know, don't wait, because you might not go forward for promotion for 2, 3, 5 years, and then it's too late to chase them down, because they're going to, I mean, hopefully they'll remember who you are, but, you know, the fear is always they're going to say, well, gee, that was such a long time ago, I can't really recall. Sadia, I'm just noting your comment in the chat. Let's come back to that in a few minutes. I'll make sure I leave time for questions. Okay. So indicators of CPA, and I mean, if I could just sort of point out one important keyword, it's evaluate, evaluate, evaluate. So of course there are outputs. You developed a course, how many people have taken that course? It's not that there aren't any countables or quantifiables, there are, but that's probably not the only thing you want to say. And importantly, you know, oftentimes what I see in the dossiers are indicators of reach. So downloads, hits on web pages, and that sort of thing. And it's not nothing, it's not meaningless. it's important, but a download doesn't tell you that the information resonated with the reader, was useful, benefited them in some way. So it's really limited in what it tells you. What it tells you is it's an indicator of reach. Where in the world has this gone? So it's important, but it's quite limited in what it tells you about. And as a result of all of the places it has spread throughout the world, this is what has happened. You don't know that part. And there are ways of figuring that out, but I can't get it into it here, I think. Any invitations you are receiving to scholarly meetings or workshops or to sit on panels, usually people are asking you and inviting you for something, for a reason. You have expertise, you have a particular perspective, you're seeing things through a Canadian lens, and it's an international table. It's important to know those things. Development of policies, presentations, evaluation reports, any educational innovations or courses that you develop or materials you develop to educate the public. Yes, what are they? Why did you develop them? Where did they go? And how have they been received by the public? And that's going to require you to do a separate little piece of work to evaluate that in some way. Your role in a professional organization might come into play here. Solicited letters, accolades, awards or recognitions, media reports. Sometimes we write for publishers, you know, Today's Parent or a magazine or a newspaper, and we don't know what their circulation is, but you can get that information. And if you think about it, you probably can get some analytics from the publisher about how many people actually directed their attention to your story. You know, you might as well ask, you never know. So some of the common pitfalls we see in the CPA dossiers. Guess number one, here's what I did, not anything about the impact of what you did. So failing to state, to providing evidence of impact, you didn't track it, you didn't evaluate against your intention, all of those things. And the thing is, you know, if you didn't do it, you can't circle back and do it now. And so it's really a key part of planning out your knowledge translation and community engagement activities to be clear at the outset. Why are you doing this? How are you doing this? What's your role in it? And how are you going to know it did any good out there? It had any benefit for anybody, led to the creation of some other work, led to a change in policy, led to change of attitudes, contributed in some way. What is that and how are you going to know? Not identifying your contribution in a group activity, not demonstrating that scholarly piece of it, simply stating what you did, that's the same thing. And then not highlighting your national or your international impact. And again, that's another thing you have to kind of think about, you know, invitations. But it's not just invitations to plenaries and keynotes, it's who reaches out to you, who, you know, the more you put information out on social media platforms, the more exposure you have. What kind of exposure do you have? Does that lead to anybody contacting you out of the blue from a different country and asking about the work you're doing? That's an impact. That is something that has come out of your recognition for your expertise that you can somehow weave into your dossier. So some reminders for everybody as you're pulling together all your dossiers really is to check the fullness of your citations in Scopus. Academic promotion relies on Scopus, but you might want to report Scopus, and Google Scholar will usually be a higher H index because it taps more sources, more databases. If something's missing in your Scopus, you have to contact them directly, give them a list of what's missing, they'll verify it, and then they'll add it. So it's worth doing ahead of time. Don't confuse impact with productivity. I've already said that ad nauseum. International recognition, people knowing about you and your expertise, and maybe your creation of a certain type of CPA output, it can be enough that they recognize your expertise. They don't have to have the same policy in their country or implemented the course in their country, but they know about you. So unless somebody else has anything to say about that on the faculty for today's workshop, I think that's accurate. We have some CPA tools. There's, the promotion template we use as reviewers. There's a list of CPA considerations for those who are applying and developing CPA dossiers. And then the new thing, and I'd have to check with Rachel to see if it's there anywhere, but a CPA activity table, which I'll show you in a moment, where you can kind of like just a logic model where you can start to document these important core components of impact. There's the knowledge translation planning tool that you can download. The quickest way is really from my website, but it's also on the Sick Kids website. It's just a couple of clicks away to find it there. We have training in knowledge translation. If you're doing a lot of knowledge translation, community engaged work, developing outputs for non-academic audiences, you might be worth your while, because we will teach you more about how to set that up successfully and how to evaluate it. And I would say add impact metrics to all your deliverables, including your social media metrics. So this is a bit of a laundry list in the next couple of slides, just about ways you can demonstrate different types of indicators. So reach indicators, where is this information being distributed? Who's actually putting their hands on it? You can't say a whole lot more about how they're benefiting, but you can, talk about its reach when you have it particularly out in electronic form. Where it becomes more interesting are things like user satisfaction or, other forms of recognition that have been garnered by your output, use indicators and usefulness indicators. Who's intending to use this information? One way they might, quote unquote, use it is take something you've developed and get in touch with you to say, we love this, we want to adapt it for use in our setting, would you give us permission to do that? That's a value indicator. That is, hey, this is a good thing, it's relevant for us, it resonates, we want to make some adaptations so that it fits our context. I would document that. And by document it is just, keep a list. I kept a running list of the different organizations that reached out about the knowledge translation planning template. Keep in mind, some people are going to adapt it and use it and not credit you. That happens when stuff is out there on the internet, but sometimes they will reach out to you and declare their interest and the value this has for them and their group, and you can capture that just by tracking it. Who finds the information useful, what sort of capacity building emerges, what kinds of collaborations are you engaged in that weren't there before, and what's the utility and the impact, the benefits of those collaborations across the majority world and non-majority world, so high SES countries, low and middle income countries. And then just a whole bunch of other things, but it's going to be so individual to what your intention is. Obviously, when you pick a methodology for research, it maps to your research questions. You want to do the same thing here. You want your methodology for evaluating your impact to map to your intention or your purpose. And so you'll have these slides. You can look through these various impact indicators. Process measures, technology system measures, those sorts of things. This notion, we are really, really lucky to be in this faculty at the University of Toronto, especially if you do CPA and you do a lot of CPA, which I think would not be recognized in another university. It's not that there are no other universities worldwide that look at this, and it's being this sort of expansion of what we consider scholarship and important academic work is manifest in things like the declaration, the DORA Declaration on Research Assessment. You can go look that up. It's easy to find online. Those of us sitting on CIHR research committees know that CIHR is alert, attuned, and behind the DORA Declaration. So this is really nice too. It just means that, you know, the things we're doing to connect with community outside of academia count. Maybe not as much as the things we do within academia, but they count and people are paying attention. So that's a good thing. And metrics are also shifting as we find ourselves deeper and deeper into a digital age. And just by example, this is an article written by Dan Cabrera out of, oh gosh, I forget now, Mayo Clinic, sorry, in the US on social media scholarship and how they integrated social media metrics into their academic promotion and tenure. And so it's an interesting thing to look at. That was 2017, so almost 6 years ago now. Metrics is a short form for the words alternative metrics. And they're really measures of attention. And as we put things out there for the wider public digitally, we are doing so that they can reach beyond academia and the traditional channels of what for a long time were not open channels of communication, but were closed behind paywalls and so on, which still exist to this day. But they are, you know, measures of what kind of attention is the wider world giving to your work, to the things that you are doing. They can be applied to people, journals, books, data sets, and you will often have seen the social media swirly. I'm sure it probably has a different, I don't know, altmetric image. It's probably more professional, tied to your journal articles or other things that you're putting out there on social media, which gives you an indication of where the mentions, where the attention is occurring on various platforms. And attention is an impact. If people are giving attention to what you're producing and the work that you're doing, that's an example of usefulness, of potential benefit, of value. Another tool that has emerged in the last, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years is Impact Story. I've given you the URL at the bottom left there. It's an open source web-based tool that provides altmetrics to sort of like all of your stuff that exists on the web. Now, if you don't have things on YouTube, you're not on Twitter, and we're not going to go into the whole Twitter discussion. You know, it may not surface a whole lot of things, but it gives you an overview, then it gives you another overview of your achievements, your timeline, your publications, and is kind of culminating some summary statistics of attention garnered on the World Wide Web that you might use and report on in your dossier. And so this is an example of what an altmetric looks like for a paper. It comes up on the page of BMJ, typically in one of the side panels. You can click on the altmetric and it'll take you to altmetric, the website, and give you information on the paper. So geographical breakdown, demographic breakdown, and then breakdown of information by different social media platform. And you know, it's a measure of attention. Attention is probably going to be more indicative of who's seen it than citation. So this is an example of the knowledge translation planning template, and I have a few minutes left, so I just want to make sure I get through. And it's available at that link there that's in the upper left. And this is only the first page. It's a 4-page document that just gives you a planful and structured way to capture a dissemination plan so that you cover off comprehensively all the pieces that are core components of good dissemination. This is the CPA activity table that I've seen used in someone's dossier in the past. So describing the CPA activity, I've given you an example here, why you did this work, what was your role, why did you disseminate or implement this work, what were the benefits you were striving for, so your intention, and then how can you demonstrate that you achieved your CPA aims and who benefited and how so, and you can start to document that there, or at least have a plan for how you might do that. So that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing and look at the chat. And I'm open to answering any questions that you may have. So I agree with Mary Jane's response to, is it okay to include unsolicited thank yous? I think if they're thanking you, they don't want to hide the fact that they're thanking you. It's just going in your dossier. So you're not making it public. It's only a committee that's going to see this. And I think, it came to you. I think it's then yours. Don't think you have to hide the compliment.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind, on that note, I was curious, saving the emails, is it best to take a screenshot? I've copied and pasted, but like the date and time doesn't necessarily show up if I'm using Outlook. I was just curious. I'm sorry, it's a very detailed question, but it'd just be helpful for me to know.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you would, depending on the volume that you have, you wouldn't necessarily put this in an appendix. Like, if you got 500, oh, this is amazing emails, you might want to just synthesize those in some way. But I actually just save the email in an Outlook file called accolades, and then I can worry about how I'm going to synthesize them and what story do they tell. And then I can, can put subfolders about, well, this is about this and this is about that and that's about that. And then I can kind of pick through them and pick quotes. In terms of soliciting feedback, you also want to give people an opportunity to provide a testimonial if they have one. They don't have to, but if you're going to ask them 3 or 4 questions on a survey they're going to answer on their iPhone, why not leave an open blank and say, if you're willing to provide a testimonial, and you can say, I'm going up for promotion soon, these are good things to know, or I simply want to understand better the benefits this workshop, this course, this pamphlet, these materials have had on you, and what are your intentions for using it, or how you found them beneficial. It depends what you want to ask. Doing this is no different than what we encourage organizations that do tailored dissemination as part of their business. They also have a tendency to put information out there on their websites and not evaluate whether it has an impact on anybody. They don't evaluate it. They look at their analytics and say, oh, this is getting some interest, but then beyond that, you have no way of knowing. So surveying people, and just, even if it's not a representative group of everybody who's had access, getting some feedback on what this is like for the knowledge user is important. That's your impact story.
If I may, you mentioned that there are open data source websites that you can kind of use to collect like a 5-question, just something to collect feedback. Do you have any suggestions?
Some of them we've used for teaching, but when I do it just for feedback, I just use SurveyMonkey. I'm doing it for me, and I'll just, and what I'll do is on my last slide, I'll put up a QR code, because everybody has a phone in the room, and I'll say, can you take 3 minutes to QR this and answer 4 questions so that I can have some feedback about whether this met your need today, right? Most people will do it. So I just gave a workshop for half a day to Canadian Pediatric Society. There were about 40 people, and most of them did it. But I don't let them leave the room. Like, okay, I'm not standing blocking the door, but I just I do make a point of saying, can you take a few minutes to do this, please? because you'll never get them after, right? Very few people will then respond to a link sent days later. Ken.
Thanks, Melanie, for this overview, and I think you helped us out in our locally with our CPA documentation for our academic trust fund application at St. Mike's. So it's been very helpful. I think what I'm a little bit intimidated about is with regards to the extent of impact, and I maybe this is like a silly question, but like, what's the, I guess what's the little sort of low bar when it comes to impact that would be considered when it comes to promotion? I guess I worry because maybe some of my CPA from an education perspective, does require some work, but I'm not sure if anybody outside of the University of Toronto cares about what I do, what I've done. So that's sort of the question I have around sort of impact in particular.
Well, impact is contextual. So who are the knowledge users in your situation, for the work that you're doing? And if they're internal audiences, that's fine. You still are doing something over and above probably your day job to have an impact on them. So it's not like, I'm not talking global impact here. The scope can be defined by you, but the reason you're doing that activity is because, and then you fill in the blank. Why are you doing it? Right? So, and in doing that activity for your knowledge users, what are they getting from it? And it could be things like they're going to be aware of information they perhaps were not aware of before. And then if they're aware of this information, sometimes an impact is reassurance. If I see information about something evidence-based in front of me on the web, sometimes the only thing I'm walking away from is, phew, I'm doing the right thing. Or I feel more confident about taking care of my sick baby with this issue now, because I've read that I'm doing the right thing. That's an impact, right? It's not, now remember, impact is not always instrumental. So we share research evidence that isn't always going to lead to a change, a practice change, something that people will actually do differently. Sometimes, and most of the time, our research is conceptual or symbolic in terms of its utility. And so if it's conceptual, no one's going to do anything different because they understand the power of empathy, they might, but it's really about that understanding. And it's sort of like how it impacts you, your decision-making, your attitudes, your knowledge, your feelings about things. That's an impact, and people can report on that.
I think that's helpful. Just think my personal circumstance, just one aspect is the idea of, disseminating, again, an idea that's not necessarily mine, but of a sort of a renewal or the use of a different novel assessment tool in undergraduate education that is sort of now, I guess, disseminated through the various other departments other than just psychiatry and the work that I've contributed.
So Ken, I want to jump in there because again, your case is an interesting one. Somebody who may have done I said you can be promoted on CPA with no publication, no grant, or in education, and you cannot be promoted on CPA without no impact or minimal impact. But I can imagine some dossier that would not make it on CPA because they don't have enough impact, but would make it on excellence in education, where the impact may be much more narrow, it may be much more. So remember, it's for some people, and you may be one of those cases, I don't know, but given the way you talk and say, gee, I'm not sure I have enough impact, but I've done a lot of education product, that may be a better fit for education. So each of the platforms are overlapping. Because obviously there are people who do it all, like Melanie described herself. She could probably have been promoted on research or CPA. She decided to go to CPA and to emphasize impact. Somebody who goes purely on research, on publication and grant may have no word about impact. And you can imagine somebody on education having between quote, no impact and no publication, but having outstanding, excellent education product. Now, in reality, my case are artificial and fictional. If you have great education product, they probably have some form of impact. But it may be, again, what Melanie was saying, how to tell your story. So people should not worry. That's where the discussion with their chief, their colleague, looking at various dossiers. So I said people can ask dossier from Rachel. If you feel you fall in between education and CPA, you ask the dossier for both. And you may say, I look, those are like prototype template. Well, my work looked much more like X and then Y, and it goes to that platform. People should not worry endlessly. I'm also responding to a question that was sent to me. If you have international impact and reputation, okay, but you say, gee, I'm way better known in Africa or in Asia than in Canada, you will meet the national, you understand, U of T is not stupid. If you have done all your work in global mental health in Asia, and you're very well known in Asia, and you're not that well known in Canada, if your impact is international or reputation international, obviously you automatically meet the national criteria. So I'm typing it, almost finished. Anyway, back to you guys. Mary Jane may want also, because she has a big vision. Don't worry about it. It's a fair, smart, rational process. You're not dealing with a CRA who is trying to use rule against you. They're trying to use rule to where you fit.
I mean, the other thing is to sort of interrogate yourself, and you can do that with a friend, is just describe your innovation and have them ask you questions. Why did you develop it? Who's it for? What's it supposed to do? Who uses it? How do you know it helps them? It's really simple. It's not complicated to develop that narrative. You just have to ask yourself those kinds of questions and then document it. Okay. That's it for me.
I just wanted to add to the international comment on reputation and outcomes. What I was thinking, the person who asked that question too, sometimes individuals have an international reputation, but what they're doing or whatever the innovation is or the research area, say it's a new service or a clinical approach to something or tool, it may not yet itself been taken up somewhere, but they're very developing it in Toronto. In fact, sometimes people are coming here to learn about it or spend time with the person. So that's why sometimes I see in the decanal debates, a little bit, they don't, but they're not known. It hasn't gone internationally yet, the initiative. But if I see evidence of international impact by the person that they're invited to give talks and they're internationally presented, as Benoit said, that meets the bar. So we were going to take a break, but maybe we can go forward we have a minute, but John is next. There's a lot of questions too about teaching and education. So I don't know, do you need a break or should we just go forward, John, or what do you want to do, folks? Thank you so much, Melanie. It's always good.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
It's an excellent overview.
No break. John, now it's 3:30 and people who want to make a break, it's virtual, can take their break privately.
Okay.
Mute yourself, turn your camera off, and you can do whatever you want.
So John is an education scholar, and he's actually sat also on the Senior Promotions Committee for the Faculty of Medicine. So over to you, John.
Okay, so thanks everyone for hanging in for my presentation for Promotions Primer. So I'm John Tashima, I'm a psychiatrist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. I've presented on this topic a number of times before. As Mary Jane mentioned, I've been on the Decanal Promotions Committee for a few years, so I've had the opportunity to sort of see how this aspect of promotion gets handled particularly. And so we're going to focus on talking about preparing a teaching dossier and also thinking about these kinds of different pathways to promotion on the basis of teaching and education. So this has already been mentioned before, but just to highlight again, there's basically two main pathways if you are going forward on the basis of teaching education. There is excellence, and the criteria for excellence are listed there. This is also in the promotions manual, which, as has been mentioned many times before, you really need to read the relevant sections in the promotions manual. Or you can go forward on the basis of sustained excellence in teaching. And the general expectation is that that's going to be 10 plus years. One of the excellence criteria really is about sort of this issue of local, national, and international impact, depending on the level that you're trying to apply to. And so you have to think about how then you can demonstrate that you are having impact in your teaching and education at these levels in order to go forward on the basis of excellence. Now, if you are just primarily working in the context of, being local and doing a really great job of that and being able to maintain that over a sustained period of time, then the sustained teaching excellence pathway is probably your best bet. This is, as was mentioned before, this is sort of the option for the person who's really kind of just really known for being a really great teacher in their area, that they're the person that trainees, seek out experiences with this person because they're that well regarded in the system. They are a person that's often won many awards, or at least been nominated for awards locally for their teaching. They may have some of the top ratings if they're, like, say, a lecture-based teacher or a seminar-based teacher. So you're really kind of standing out as someone who is doing this really well over a long period of time. You do not, though, in the sustained pathway, need anything external to the local context, really, that demonstrates any impact beyond the local context. So that's sort of the key difference there. And as mentioned before, there's no external review process. There are some departments that have solicited sort of what we would call internal reviews, where they get other people within the Faculty of Medicine to review the person's dossier to comment on, are they demonstrating that kind of excellence? And so I've had the opportunity, for example, to do that for someone in another department, where I reviewed their materials and then provided a letter sort of outlining my impression of whether they're demonstrating this kind of sustained excellence locally. Now, for those of you who are not going forward on the basis of teaching and education, you're going forward on CPA or you're going forward on research, you still have to demonstrate competence in teaching. So everybody at least has to demonstrate competence. And so for those who are going forward on research and CPA, you need to demonstrate that you're doing teaching and that you are doing it at least decently, okay? So these are sort of the components that are listed in the promotions manual about what demonstrates this competence. Now, that teaching may be with grad students, that teaching may be seminars, that teaching may be in any number of venues. It could be also in continuing professional development, it could be in public education, there could be a range of different audiences, and it could be anything from one-to-one up to large crowds. Whatever the context, though, you need to demonstrate that you're still doing this reasonably well, okay? And so you want to have some kind of evidence of this through at least some kind of feedback and evaluations. There are certainly settings where that doesn't happen, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might try to address that if there aren't a lot of formal evaluations done in the setting in which you teach and supervise. So my tips for you all, if this hasn't been hammered home enough, is read the manual for academic promotion, because the specifics about what you need to do for teaching education are all laid out there. And really, you want to make it easy for the reviewer to see that you're meeting the criteria. So if I'm reviewing your dossier and I want to look to see for evidence of competence, show me this information. Show me that you have a mastery of your subject area, that you have demonstrated good communication skills, that you are able to act professionally, that you have a positive learning environment. Like, through the material that you're providing, show me this stuff so that I can see, oh, clearly meets competence. I don't have any worries about that. I can move on to assess other aspects of the dossier. Or if you're going forward on excellence, again, show me the criteria of how excellence has been met, and then it makes my job easy as a reviewer to kind of sign off on that. So you've heard already about some of these tables. There is a table that's specifically related to teaching, and maintain this table. Now, don't leave it until the year you're applying, because if you've left that for 10 years, that'll be a lot of like retrospective work that you have to do. And unless you're really good at keeping track of all your learners and all your seminars and all that sort of stuff, you might have a difficult time reconstructing this. Many of us have to submit some kind of data for our annual reviews to obtain sort of any kind of academic funds for teaching activities. That's a great time to sort of update this kind of table if you have to compile the information for some other purpose anyways. It's really hard to construct this many years down the line when you've probably lost some of the information or can't find it anymore. And I was mentioning before that there are going to be situations where you don't have formal evaluations already involved. If you're doing medical student teaching, or if you're doing resident teaching, there exists formal mechanisms for getting the evaluations done. Admittedly, they don't always get completed, but at least there's a formal mechanism. But there are other contexts in which there are no formal evaluation processes. So if you get invited to, I don't know, go do a talk with some community agency, public presentation of some sort, they may not have any evaluation that they get people to fill out. So you should ask them, do you evaluate these talks? Do you evaluate these presentations? If not, you might suggest that you provide an evaluation instead, so that you can at least get feedback on your presentation. These days, that's often more often done instead of a pen and paper version, with just setting up a really simple SurveyMonkey link that participants in that presentation can complete at the end of your presentation, and then you have feedback. But ultimately, your job is to ensure that one way or another you're getting evaluations on the teaching you're doing. If it's not already part of that setup of wherever you're teaching, then you want to make sure that you ensure that it takes place even through providing your own evaluation form or kind of online survey that would give you that feedback. So think about doing that, because there's no way you're going to get this information well after the presentation. This kind of point has been mentioned about all kinds of other stuff. I would mention it again for teaching as well. Save anything and everything that relates to your teaching and education activity. If you have created materials for different seminars, presentations, save that. We were talking before about emails. I save those as well. I usually ask people for permission to use them for my dossier purpose if I think of it at the time. Also, emails demonstrating any sharing of educational materials are really important. So if so-and-so from University of Alberta wants your notes for the seminar that you do on such and such a topic, then keep that kind of email documentation to show how your material has been disseminated more widely. And unsolicited thank you cards are also kind of a nice kind of supplement, especially if they've got some really nice choice messages. So save those as well. You can include some of those kinds of comments in your dossier as well, in addition to the more formal anonymous comments that occur in different evaluation forms. So another thing that may not come so easily for people who are in teaching and education is education awards, simply because there are a number of awards that you actually have to get nominated for that are not just simply kind of done by like students. These are ones that are essentially ones you have to make an application for, and it may not happen unless you kind of initiate the process, and even if you, unless you also do some of the work involved in this process. So it's important to actually find out if there are education or teaching awards that may be related to your area of teaching or work, either because you are teaching residents and it's an award for resident teaching, or continuing professional development and it's an award for continuing professional development, or it might be for curriculum development, or it might be for mentorship. But there may be awards that are relevant to what you do as a teacher. And so those awards won't, if you want to just wait until an award magically lands in your lap, you might wait a long time, but you might actually get more yield if you actually are more proactive about it, identify awards that you might be eligible for, get people to help you apply. You might need to do some of the homework for that award, you might need to provide them with a summary of the work that you've done, your evaluations, various other stuff. But if you do that, you will have a higher chance of winning some of these awards. And these are one of the few ways that teachers and educators can get some form of external recognition, external validation of their excellence. So do think about being a bit more proactive about this. Even if you're really kind of, unsure if you are qualifying for the award, certainly go speak to someone as an education leader who might be able to give you some advice about this, because maybe you might not yet qualify, but they might tell you that with a certain amount of accumulated experience or with certain other things done, you might be eligible soon, and then that could be something that could be really helpful in your overall track record of excellence. So let's talk now more specifically about constructing the teaching dossier. So there's again, in the promotions manual, there's details about how to go about doing this. And I'm going to expand on that slightly to add a few other points that I think are really useful to have in a teaching dossier that aren't necessarily as specifically mentioned in the promotions manual. But this is the breakdown of kind of the suggested sections. They can have slightly different titles, but more or less they have these kinds of concepts covered. So I'll go through each of these individually. So the teaching philosophy statement is sort of your intro to the teaching dossier, and it's basically a statement about kind of why and how you teach. It's really meant to be kind of a bit of a reflective piece, and it kind of, introduces the reviewer to kind of who you are as a teacher and kind of what's important to you about teaching and how you do it. So there's many different ways that you can go about doing this, and this may change over time too. So what you might have written for this in an earlier version of your dossier may no longer be relevant, and you may wish to change this. I think that writing this out can be really helpful for yourself, first of all, as a teacher, because it makes you think more explicitly about why you do things a certain way, why that's important to you, why that's meaningful for you. It's also really helpful for the reviewer, though, as a bit of a guide to see that you are actually caring about your teaching and taking it seriously enough to think about what's important about it, what works about it, and why you do things the way you do. So some kind of statement at the beginning like this can be really helpful. There should be some way of demonstrating cataloging what teaching you do, how much teaching, and sort of a summary of the quality of it. Now, to some extent, that table 7 that I mentioned before does cover this to some extent, but you can really kind of expand on this in better detail in a teaching dossier. So, if you're teaching a particular kind of course, for example, like how many sessions did you teach? How many years did you teach the course? How many students have you taught over the course? If you're able to keep track of that kind of information. And then obviously any kind of ratings that you've received in terms of evaluations, ideally with comparisons to the faculty mean. Some of this is done automatically for things like Power and MedSys. And that helps distinguish you as a teacher compared to your peers. That's particularly important if you're going forward on sustained excellence in teaching, because what you want to try to demonstrate is that you're not just average, that you actually are excellent, that you're above the faculty mean on a fairly consistent basis. And then you want to select comments and any other communications that highlight sort of how people have valued you as a teacher, because that really kind of, sometimes the details in those qualitative comments are much more illustrative than, say, a number. Oh, was there a question?
Oh, sorry.
And then lastly, as mentioned, awards and even nominations for awards are helpful to further demonstrate that quality. As was mentioned before, really focus on summarizing things. You are going to drive a reviewer crazy if all they get is like 200 pages of like printouts from Power or MedSys. That is so not helpful. And quite frankly, you are likely going to get a reviewer missing details that might be really helpful to make your case, because somewhere around page 100, they're just going to stop caring, So make it easy for them. like it's harder for you, obviously, you have to put the work into summarize things, but make it easier for them so they can understand what the heck is this teaching that you're doing? How much have you done? How many years have you done it? What have the scores been like? What are some of the key comments? Make it easy for them to digest that so that they can really quickly look at it and see, this person's been doing this consistently really well, right? And they're really valued by the students and so on and so forth. Like, don't make it hard for us. If I have to keep reading through each individual power evaluation, look at the numbers, try to figure out how this averages out over time, like all that kind of stuff, it is just so challenging. And again, if you hit a reviewer where they get sick of doing that, you may not have a very thorough review or not one that's as in your favor. So don't make them work too hard. Make it easy for them to review how well you've been doing your teaching and how much of it you've been doing. It's important in terms of things like supervision and mentorship that there is going to be some other kinds of qualitative description. And that's because oftentimes these activities are not formally evaluated with any kind of like rating scale and stuff like that. So you want to talk a bit about your role as a teacher or mentor, and then try to include any kind of testimonials from trainees about how you contributed to their to their kind of learning and their career pathway. You might have to solicit this sometimes more specifically, especially at kind of at the end of the relationship where they're moving on to their next whatever part of their career. But that's really useful to get some kind of a statement from them. It's not the same, it's not obviously not the same thing as anonymous sort of commentary. And so you need to be explicit that this was solicited, but it's certainly better than zero detail at all about what that person may have experienced in your mentorship and supervision. So it's important to think about asking people for some kind of documentation if there's not some other way of documenting that impact. In the promotions process, there will also be a seeking out of a variety of trainees that you've had contact with for their opinions about your teaching and mentorship, where that's done without you knowing that they're being solicited. And so in that case, they will be able to give that kind of feedback as well to the reviewers and to the committees. But you can certainly do this process of getting that information into your dossier. It certainly helps demonstrate this, especially if supervision and mentorship is your main area of teaching. Because as I said, that's not otherwise well evaluated. In terms of awards, if you get awards or if you've been able to get nominated, please describe what the award is for to clarify the importance and scope. A lot of times, especially if an award is named after someone, it's not always very explicit about what the award's for. And so, especially, and keep in mind, you're being reviewed by people outside of our department. So they have no idea like what the Robin Hunter Award is, right? So if you can explain that a bit more with maybe some bullet points, it just helps the reviewer know more about the significance. So give them a little bit more detail. It's just really helpful. I see there's a question. So Sadia's asking about if you're soliciting any sort of information. I would state that it's solicited. It's just being transparent about it, Sadia. So if you are asking for someone to write you that letter, I just state that it was solicited. Okay. Something that not everyone does in their dossier, but I think is really useful, is to demonstrate efforts to improve your teaching. So if you're someone, particularly who's going forward on the basis of teaching, show people that you actually care about teaching enough to try to improve it. This is particularly important if you've received occasional kind of negative ratings or negative comments. As was being stated before, those aren't deal breakers. However, we need to see that you try to do something about it. So if you got, a few comments about, being like overly didactic in your lectures or something like that, or that you didn't let trainees have enough opportunity to get feedback on their performance, like you need to show that you did something about that, you tried to change that, you tried to rectify that, whether it was just simply taking specific actions on that in your subsequent teaching. It might be that you took courses or workshops to improve that area of your teaching, and so on. But show the reviewer that you are trying to do something to improve your teaching. I think this is particularly important if you're going forward on sustained excellence in teaching. If you go forward on that and you're like doing nothing to actually improve as a teacher, just kind of flying by the seat of your pants forevermore, that may be fine if you've got nothing but stellar reviews, but it looks a little bit weaker if like you're not always performing at that standard and yet not trying to do something about it. So I always document things that I do that are aimed to sort of improve my teaching, whether formal or informal. You may remember in the competence section, there's this thing called mastery of subject, and it's kind of obvious, but it's good to sort of demonstrate that you cover this in your dossier, which is basically whatever area you're teaching around or supervising in, how can you demonstrate that this is like something that you're really up to speed on? So if you're teaching in the area of like, neuroscience, or you're teaching in the area of a specific psychotherapy, what have you done to maintain your kind of mastery of that topic area? Because usually it's the area that you're doing your clinical work in if you're a clinician, but nonetheless, what are you doing to really kind of keep yourself on top of your game there, so that the teaching you're providing about that area then is maintained at that kind of high level of content mastery. So show that you are someone that kind of, most of us are doing this anyways, it's just a matter of being explicit about this in the dossier. Innovation and scholarship in teaching education crosses over into CPA, which you just heard about. So if you're going for primarily though on teaching and education excellence, then you could highlight this specifically just in your teaching dossier in terms of curricula you developed, or kind of new teaching methods, or different ways of evaluating courses or assessing students, any kind of new educational materials you've created. And then, as has been mentioned before, you need to demonstrate that kind of impact and dissemination, especially if you're applying on the basis of excellence to go for like associate or full professor, because you need to demonstrate that that impact is going beyond the local arena. Is that a question? So the question is about providing names of previous residents. So that is sort of, expected to some extent, because, you want to show kind of a track record of kind of who you've supervised. One issue there is that those people are sometimes people that are contacted for these other kinds of solicit, like where the department solicits sort of those student testimonials. So you'll need to submit at least some names for that purpose. You're not necessarily going to have all the names of the people you taught in seminars or like lectures or something. That's obviously not realistic. But where it can be really helpful to have the names of previous residents or students is also if you've played any kind of mentorship role, because especially if you can show that trainee then went on to do something on the basis of the impact of your supervision and mentorship. Like, let's say they keep going into your area of specialty because of that supervision, demonstrating that kind of track record would be good. So I would tend to be able to include that. At very least, you need it in table 7, if nothing else. All right. Lastly, if you can craft sort of any kind of innovative or scholarly work you do as a bit more as a narrative, that really helps. If you, and this kind of goes back to exactly what Melanie was laying out in her presentation, like, show the arc of how you went from like idea all the way through to kind of like dissemination and impact. A bit as a story or a narrative, I think it just reads a lot more easily. It helps the reviewer understand kind of the process that went on and why it's important, why it's meaningful. So this is just sort of an example of trying to do that kind of thing, where I sort of lay out a bit about where the interest developed, what was done, and kind of went through some of the description of some of the impacts subsequently. So you'll get the slides afterwards if you care about that kind of detail, but it's just sort of an example of that. And then, especially if you're going forward in the area of excellence in teaching and education, your role as a leader and any kind of administrative duties is really important as well. It's really important that people understand what you actually did in these kinds of roles, not that just that you have the role, because again, someone outside of the department may have no idea what that role is. They may not have an equivalent role like that in their department. So explain what the role is, explain what you do, explain your unique contributions particularly. And that's especially the case if you're on like a task force or a committee or some other kind of larger body. Were you just kind of sitting there on Zoom with your screen off, just like, you know, checking your email, or did you actually provide some kind of substantive contribution? What did you do specifically that contribute to the process of that group or that effort or that initiative? And even better if you can get some external corroboration that that was your impact from, say, the committee chair or whatever. Ian's question is, would it make sense for the education-related CPA to be included in the teaching dossier instead of the CPA dossier? So, I mean, I don't know if you need to necessarily do both, as long as you have it in one or the other. I think a lot of it also depends on which way you're leaning in terms of your kind of focus in the application. If you're going forward on the basis of CPA, then you want your CPA dossier well fleshed out. And I wouldn't necessarily say you absolutely have to have the same level of detail on this innovation in your teaching dossier. If you're going forward on the basis of teaching and excellence in teaching and education, then you could either flesh it out fully in your teaching dossier, and then in your CPA dossier, say C teaching dossier or something like that, or you could do it as your CPA dossier. As long as it's somewhere, as long as I'm a reviewer and I can find it and you can lead me to it so I can understand what you did, I think that's ultimately what's important. Less so about whether it's in this category or that category. All right, so then that is it from my formal presentation. So I'm going to open it up to further questions. So happy to take people's questions. And then I know that Mary Jane's still around, Melanie's still around too, so we can also take questions beyond the teaching and education realm of things if need be. Sadia, go ahead.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, this would be a more broader question. So I'm not going to apply this year. I learned I have to wait minimum 3 years, and that's fine, just kind of planning ahead. I guess something I struggle with is that I see myself in kind of all realms, like in research, CPA, and in education. When I eventually apply for promotion, am I forced to choose one? I guess, is there an expectation that there should be at least clear excellence in one? And it's great that you have evidence in the other areas, but there should be clear excellence in one. And okay, I'm seeing Melanie put her thumb up. Yeah, like that's the part that I struggle with, is I enjoy doing a little bit of everything, but I worry, you know, does that mean I'm spreading myself thin and therefore could affect promotion because I'm not like achieving the standard for one particular area?
So I thought, yeah, Melanie and Mary Jane were sort of nodding that from the promotions committee standpoint, it's easiest for them if they can see that you're excellent in at least one area. You can be excellent in more than one area, but at least one area, it's easy to demonstrate that you're doing excellence in one area. That said, I would really encourage you to keep doing what you really enjoy and what you really find meaningful, even if it's a bit of all over the place, because that's going to be more important in the long run than how quickly you meet criteria for promotion. So as you've heard a little bit, there is some potential for these kinds of things to overlap. There is kind of this kind of blurred boundary between pure research and what actually ends up being more CPA. There's people that have been on a research pathway who ultimately could apply on the basis of CPA because in the end, what they can demonstrate more clearly is their CPA rather than it being narrowly defined as pure research. And as you heard also, there's overlaps between education and CPA as well. And so if you're mainly doing kind of innovations in education, that might be better crafted and demonstrated and documented as CPA. So you can think So that would be another way to think about it, is that if you're kind of doing a bunch of different stuff, how well, which area could it be easiest to demonstrate the excellence in, so that a reviewer can assess that more clearly, even though that it crosses some boundaries and so on. I don't know, Melanie, if you have, or Mary Jane, if you have further
I would
comments.
only add, and I don't want this to come out judgy, because, you know, everybody's career is different and there might be lots of reasons why you do the things you do. But when I see scholars kind of teaching and doing research and doing CPA, I kind of feel like that's the job description. You know, I mean, it depends on your area of science and where you focus and what time you have and everything else that's going on in your life. So context is everything. So, you know, please don't assume I'm brushing everybody with the same, or, you know, painting everybody with the same brush. But I think to be scholarly in this, in the times right now, means we have to be thinking about those things and thinking about outside of academia and how to, even just how to demonstrate that our research is relevant and resonates for the people we're doing research for, who stand to benefit from our research even. So.
Yeah, it actually says to write in the manual somewhere that we're all, actually anybody in academic medicine, including the PhDs, pretty much is doing research, some education, and some CPA in a way. Like that's like basically everybody's job in many ways, or at least involved in some way. One way to think about it is, where are you most deeply engaged? Where can you present the scholarship in the most clear? You can cross-reference, you can explain the crossover, the cross-reference, but where are you most deeply engaged? I did have a discussion with the dean about this, because, and I know Benoit has a particular view, and he's probably still here. It's okay. Like, I actually went on all 3 years ago. I mean, that was, and you do see, and Dean Young and I talked about this, there are some people, for their own identity, it's very important they go on all 3 for excellence. Like, that is their story. And we do see that occasionally. And I had on, and John may remember, on the decanal committee, there were people saying, please tell them they have to pick one, because it makes our job easier. Because you know what happens? Sometimes they're going, well, if they were excellent on CPA, the chair is putting them through excellent on, you know, research, but actually, you know what I mean? And CPA isn't the default for less research either. But so it gets complicated. But if it's really clear, I mean, you can make your case to Benoit, I think, if it's all 3. If it's not, pick one and do a really excellent job at showing the excellence and competence, at least in the other areas, especially teaching, at least competence. And you could be excellence in teaching too. So Dean Young agreed that we wouldn't force it, that you can only have 2 platforms, because he also thinks the identity piece, and especially people very engaged in many areas, you know, that is their story. And we don't want to, as John said, and Melanie, you know, we have a very diverse faculty across the Faculty of Medicine and Psychiatry, really diverse what comes in. So I know Benoit feels strongly, pick one excellent platform, and the other one you can choose excellent or competent, but try to really zero in. I know he feels that. I don't know if he's still here, but I know he thinks that he might ask you to do that pretty much.
Just the other comment I would say, Mary Jane, is that at decanal, it was sometimes kind of irritating when they would check off all the boxes and they don't actually need excellence for all the boxes. Like don't oversell yourself. Like, you know, that can be problematic. You don't want to piss off your reviewer, basically.
That's right, because they want to promote you. That's the other thing. People say, I used to be on the committee before I chaired it, and I think I was asked because I was so articulate about getting them through. I mean, we want them to go through. By the time you get to decanal, you're in pretty good shape, right? Or you wouldn't have gotten that far. You've already had people look. But actually, I will find, like, most reviewers around the table, and so people looking at your dossiers are from molecular biology and surgery and physiotherapy, all kinds of areas. So tell your story clearer, but they're actually trying to advocate for you. I mean, I think that's what, so they're on your side. We all want you to get promoted, but be really clear in your messaging if you can, and your organization. You heard John say, don't put every evaluation in for teaching. It really does tick some people off. Or Melanie, a CPA, sometimes the CPAs are so massive and not particularly well organized. You just go, by the time they get to decanal, they may go through, but they're going, man, like, I don't know, 150 pages, like, you know, like they could have really
consolidated this, especially if you published on your CPA, include the paper and kind of synthesize. So just think about it. It's a lot of work for the reviewers. Anyway, I'll just add to John's comment there. Thank you.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
I'm in a rather unique circumstance. I'm in a subspecialty. I'm in neuropsychiatry, and I work at Toronto Rehab in the acquired brain injury program. My world has been neuropsychiatry and acquired brain injury, MS, stroke for 30, 20 years. And most of the outreach I've done, and Mary Jane has survived a few of my presentations, and I'm grateful for that, is that it's not necessarily residents. Very few residents rotates through us because it's such a narrow area. So I don't have hundreds of residents evaluations. The ones that I have are, I think, very good. But the vast majority of evaluations or presentations over these many years have no evaluations. I can ask for letters from the organizing committees, but if the last time I submitted my dossier was 2013. So I'm kind of hard pressed to find new evidence or new data to sustain excellence. Yeah. More than 120 podium presentations. How on earth do I convey to the reviewers who are not part of psychiatry and definitely not part of such a narrow area that I live in excellence? It's really challenging.
The narrow area is not the problem. I mean, you can do teaching in a narrow area and that's fine, right? So you can be in a highly subspecialized area of teaching with a highly subspecialized audience, and that's not a problem in and of itself. It is a problem though if you've got relatively little kind of track record of the excellence, basically. This is why you really need to try to find ways to get information about that. So given that you can't create evaluations that weren't done at the time of the presentations, who are essentially the leaders or administrators that could provide comment, like provide relevant perspective on sort of the teaching you've contributed over that span of time as sort of a proxy for what those evaluations might say? You know, is there, you know, if it was for a course or for a particular clinical unit or whatever, is there someone who can comment in a meaningful way, not just like you did a great job, but like actually comment in more rich detail about how important your contribution has been? That certainly will be better than no evaluations at all. Going forward, you have to really think about how can I make sure that the sessions I keep teaching get evaluated, because otherwise you're just essentially just saying I did a good job and you know, and we have to sort of take your say-so for it, and that's not going to go very far, right?
The other question, if I may, I'm cross-appointed to medicine. I don't apply through medicine at all. I go through psychiatry.
But you know what? But you should probably, so Jillian Hawker, you probably will get a letter. Like it would really help when you're cross-appointed to get a letter. I have a couple of thoughts on you. So first of all, John's right. And actually, I don't know who's PhD on here. The PhD, if you're teaching non-residents like nurses, psychologists, Abe does other disciplines or public, you, as Melanie said, and John, get some evaluations. There's a template that Krista Lantos, I think, even put on there for the PhDs. Anybody can take that. John probably has them. Their templates. Design one. Make sure somebody hands that out or gives a link or whatever after everything you do. So Abe, going forward, start doing it if you can. I think in your case, Abe, what I would do, it's going to be very important because you can't go back and get scores now. As John said, those letters would be considered internal colleague letters or letters of agencies where you've given a talk to help us understand why it was so important, how it was received, and what might have happened as a result of those talks. Two, I would, in your case, in your vision and your teaching philosophy and your rationale for where you're focused, which I know why you do what you do, tell us that story. Why it is you give those kind of talks, like you're out in a different sector, like get that right up front in your dossier. I don't know if you have teaching awards or not, that will really offset the lack of scores. And then the other thing that some of you may not know, that you could do, Abe, I think you still have time, there are people, and Ivan Silver's one of them, you can hire someone to watch you give a teaching episode, class, a talk, a lecture, or whatever. they will write a report on the competency or excellence in your teaching. They will judge as an object, and that can actually carry a fair amount of weight in teaching and education scholarships. I'm just thinking of some things you can do. It is a problem, like lack of scores for all of you. Like John's right. I've seen it, like people say, well, we're trying, like we can't tell if it's excellence. The awards will help for sure. Or that you're known as an outstanding teacher. You know, it's just like knowing people come even to hear you or from outside the institution to learn from you on some topic.
I got
too.
the Ivan Silver Award in 07.
Well, that matters.
I
But
think
you know,
Ivan might help.
yeah, you know, it also depends what bucket of teaching. So if it's a conference presentation that you give either at plenary or just as a presentation, you know, in a one of the sections, if that was peer reviewed, which they typically are, it's something to note, right? No one just gets accepted and goes. I'm a psychologist, so I don't teach any psychiatrists. I didn't have it, you know, I don't have anything to do with the psychiatrist at all. But I also do professional development and had evaluations for all of those things from the start. And then if you are doing an invited lecture in someone else's formal university course, it's worth emailing them, even if it was historical, to find out if they still have the course evaluations, because they may have information about your lecture or feedback that they didn't share with you at the time.
Yeah, some of the faculties do that too, like nursing, psychology. That's right. You can go back and get the scores if it was a lecture. That's right.
I've been saving emails for a long time with evaluations. Some documents I can open, some are PDF I cannot open. The organizations I teach for are both provincial, all over the province, and national. The people have changed. There's umbrella organizations like, you know, Trauma Foundation, Acquired Brain Injury Network, etc., etc. Can I get that? Is that okay?
You can try. Why not try? Yeah.
And if, you know, the thing you could highlight too, some of those organizations where you've been asked to come and give a lecture, like if they're national in and of themselves or provincial or international, like make sure you highlight that they were invited and that they are a certain level, because that actually would count too.
Okay.
Sorry, John, I think you were going to say something. So
All right.
Oh.
This has been very useful. I much appreciate the four of you. It's intimidating. I've been waiting and delaying for years because I thought I'm going to have to give you guys my youngest son.
Boy, be careful. You heard Benoit say don't wait forever either, because we've actually had people in other, like I hear the conversations around the table saying, what, you know, if this person had gone 5 years ago, it would have been so clear cut now, like, because sometimes the dip goes up and you just be careful that when you're ready, go. Like, I mean, because sometimes they just say, okay, well, they're definitely going through, like, why did they take so long? Like, there are those conversations. I see John put in the chat, I think you put in an evaluation, did you? I think, yeah, that's for.
I put in just a very simple, generic kind of like seminar session evaluation form that I use for those kinds of purposes. You can adapt it as you want. You can change it into survey.
Thank you, John. That's very useful.
And I was just saying also in the chat that if let's say you're supervising students in a context where there's no supervisor evaluation, although quite frankly, if it's an accredited program, there should be some kind of supervisor evaluation. But I would craft one basically then based on some of the standard supervisor evaluation forms that, you know, like there's like whether it's a power form or metis form, they all kind of ask the same questions about, you know, do you kind of make yourself available to students? Do you, you know, establish sort of a comfortable and safe learning environment? Do you provide effective feedback? Like there's different kind of qualities to sort of assess you as a teacher, and then always have like a global item, like overall, I would rate this supervisor this way, right? Because that's often where the reviewer will kind of home in on is where does it all come down to? How do they rate you overall, right? So.
But I think just looking, John, at the teaching evaluation form, I would add a question about, I don't know, however you want to phrase it. How did you benefit from this lecture? What are you walking away from?
This is my very
I had
quick-
better awareness, and you can make it easy. You can make it a pick list. So, you know, we have really focused on this for our About Kids Health website, where again, it's web content that normally you just, it's out there and people do whatever, and you don't know, you know, where it goes or what it does for people. So we ask questions on every content page for About Kids Health. Now pops up an instrument assessment method survey that asks about, you know, did you understand the information? Did it resonate for you? Was it relevant? And how was it helpful to you? Right? So, and there, you know, since you're mostly talking to either students or professionals or this or that, you know, well, I'm going to consider how it might impact my practice, or, you know, leads me in a new research direction, or I learned something about methodology I didn't know before. They give them a bit of, you know, because that's what they're walking away from at the end of your lecture. And they're certainly walking away with something. You keep getting invited, you have a long-standing career. It's just the capture of it that's important. And so for the, you know, the ones not at the career point that you and I are at, but for the young ones around here, this is like a good lesson. Like, you need to evaluate because you have to do it prospectively with every opportunity you have.
It also helps that the technology has evolved, such as that there's now iPhones.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to just click on a QR form, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Much appreciated.
Yeah.
I mean, Melanie's points about sort of additional questions is certainly, you know, important. I mean, I've often found that if I'm going to do my own homemade version, I just keep it to the fewest questions possible because I know people aren't likely to fill it out.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off between like how valuable the questions are and whether or not you're gonna get people to fill it out because it's too long. So like sometimes I just go for quick and dirty, but like exactly what Melanie's saying in terms of what can be really useful to demonstrate in the evaluations around sort of, you know, what impact it had on the students' learning, et cetera, is really important as well.
And you can add that to a pamphlet, to a talk, to a poster. QR code links straight to a survey with 5 questions. I wouldn't do more than 5 or 6. I agree with John, you lose people after that, but well thought out questions. And it means that anything you're putting out there, whether it's oral, written, video, what have you, is linked to its purpose and capturing that so what piece. You know, it's just forethought. It's not hard to do. Like once you have that survey, QR code is easy.
Yep, that's
Okay.
a great idea.
Mary Jane is reminding us all to do, and Chris, to do the evaluation for today. Speaking of evaluation.
Yeah, because it's hard to get after people leave, but I don't, are there any more questions or thank you so much, John, and for the education one interests a lot of people and they're not sure how to go about it. I think you mentioned, both of you, it is good to look at dossiers. I know Rachel has a few examples, so it really helps to take a look at somebody that was successful, I think.
And we do, there is like a compendium of different dossiers and there's some at different levels as well. So I know they compiled a few years ago so that you could have examples. And also, I mean, the other thing to do is like, if you have local colleagues that went forward successfully more recently, ask them for their version. They obviously was obviously good enough to get them promoted. So it might be a chance to read more recent examples. And the key thing there is that there's no one absolutely right way to do a dossier. There's many right ways to do a dossier. However, there are going to be some common themes about how things get effectively conveyed and presented to reviewers. So especially if you look at more than one dossier, you'll see some of those kind of common themes and ways of doing things.
So are there any more questions? Or we have a promotion talk tonight, 5:30 or 6 with full professors. So you'll get a sense. And, you know, we do that, right? When you get full professor, where we ask you to come and talk about your career and all your major outcomes. I think it's interesting and a way to celebrate and prestigious. Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you all for coming. Feel free to reach out to any of us or Rachel or, you know, we're around. So wish you well. And thank you so much for coming. Thanks again, John and Melanie.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Happy
Thank-
holidays, everybody. Thanks, Mary Jane.